Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was sent to Attack on Titan and got married to Mikasa and Annie? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sun That Fell from the Sky. The end was not a bang, but the sound of tearing fabric. One moment, there was the searing white heat of Kagaya's final, desperate attack, a bone-deep hum that vibrated through every cell of Naruto Uzumaki's body. Sasuke was a blur of black and purple beside him, his Rinnegan spinning. Sakura was a frantic shout somewhere below, her voice swallowed by the cacophony. The X paths yin and yang seals on their palms burned with a cold fire, pulling the rabbit goddess apart, unraveling her into pure, screaming chakra. And then the world twisted. It wasn't a teleportation jutsu. Not the familiar stomach-lurching flicker of a Hiraishin, or the oily slide of a Kamui. This was a violation. Kagaya, in her last iota of consciousness, had clawed at the seams of her own dimension. A hairline crack spider webbed across reality, a fissure of pure, starless black. It did not pull with the force of a Chibaku tensai, it beckoned with a chilling, absolute vacuum. Naruto felt a lurch, a pressure change that made his ears pop and his lungs ache. Sasuke's hand, reaching for him, missed by a centimeter. Naruto. His voice echoed, sounding thin and a million miles away. The world dissolved into a smear of color and pain. He was being threaded through the eye of a needle made of space-time, his senses screaming useless information at him. He saw timelines flicker past his vision, a world of gleaming metal towers. A world where oceans were made of purple fire, a world of nothing but whispering sand. It was a torrent of sensory overload, a physical and spiritual agony that fell. Like being born and dying 1,000 times a second. His six-paths sage mode, the divine power that had made him a demigod moments before, sputtered and died, the connection to his own world's natural energy severed as if by a knife. The 9 Biju within him roared in a chorus of confusion and alarm, their collective presence a frantic, tumbling ball of energy inside his soul. Kurama. He tried to yell, but he had no mouth. What's happening? Kit, just hold on. Hold yourself together. The fox's voice was a ragged anchor in the storm, but even it was strained, fighting to maintain the integrate. Why of their shared consciousness against the impossible physics of the void? Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The screaming silence was replaced by a gentle breeze. The feeling of being torn apart was replaced by the solid reality of soft, green grass beneath his cheek. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers, clean and startlingly pure. For a long moment, Naruto didn't move. He just lay there, every muscle in his body an aching, trembling protest. His chakra coils felt scoured raw, his reserves drained to a puddle at the bottom of a deep well. He was weaker than he'd been since he was a genin. A hollowed-out echo of the power he'd wielded minutes ago. He pushed himself up, his arms shaking. His bright orange and black jacket was torn and caked with the white dust of Kagaya's dimension. He looked around, his mind struggling to catalog the impossible. Before him, green fields rolled away into a hazy distance. Behind him, a dense forest of impossibly tall trees formed a dark green wall. And to his right was a sight so utterly alien it made his breath catch in his throat. A wall. It wasn't a village wall, not like Konoha's. This was a monument to paranoia, a colossal structure of pale, weathered stone that climbed so high it seemed to be challenging the sky itself. It was immense, monolithic, stretching as far as he could see in either direction, a man-made mountain range that dwarfed anything he had ever witnessed. At its base, nestled against the stone like a child clinging to its mother, was a town. The architecture was strange, timber-framed houses with red-tiled roofs. A style he'd never seen in any of the 5 great nations. It was peaceful, smoke curled from chimneys, the distant sound of a bell chimed on the breeze, and people, tiny as ants from this distance, moved through the streets. Where am I? The question was a cold stone in his stomach. This wasn't the land of fire. This wasn't any land he knew. The natural energy was thin here, muted and strange, like a song sung in a different key. He took a stumbling step forward, then another. He needed information. He needed to find a way back. Sasuke and Sakura were waiting. The war was over. He was supposed to go home. He had to go home. He was halfway to the town, his legs feeling like lead, when the ground trembled. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a single, rhythmic thump. Then another. Something huge was approaching. From beyond the wall, he looked up, his sage-honed senses, even in their weakened state, screaming a warning. A flash of light, brighter than the afternoon sun, erupted from just above the wall's gate. It was followed by a plume of steam and a sound like a mountain cracking in two. And then a face appeared over the top of the 50-meter wall. Naruto froze. He had seen giant monsters. He had fought the 10 tails. He had stood before beasts made of pure, malevolent chakra. This was different. This was wrong. It had no skin, only exposed red muscle and sinew. Its eyes were huge, glassy, and utterly devoid of intelligence. They were the eyes of an animal, but worse, they were empty. Its mouth was a lipless gash of oversized teeth, locked in a permanent, vapid grin. It was a grotesque parody of a human, scaled up to a size that defied all logic. A collective, high-pitched scream rose from the town, a wave of pure terror that washed over the fields. The giant thing drew back its leg. Naruto's eyes widened in horror. No, it couldn't. With a cataclysmic boom that shook the very air, the monster's foot smashed through the outer gate of the town. Stone, wood, and bodies were thrown into the air like children's toys. The illusion of peace was not just broken, it was annihilated. A tide of raw panic swept through the streets as smaller, but no less horrifying. Giants began to shamble through the breach. They were all different shapes and sizes. Fat ones, skinny ones, ones that crawled on all fours, but they all shared the same mindless eyes and the same horrifying, hungry grins. And they moved toward the screaming people. Naruto's exhaustion was forgotten, burned away by a sudden, incandescent rage. This was a slaughter, a senseless, brutal massacre of civilians. His body moved before his mind had finished processing the thought. He wasn't the sage of 6 paths right now. He wasn't the savior of the world. He was a shinobi, and there were people who needed help. He burst forward, a flash of orange against the green grass. His legs, powered by the dregs of his chakra, ate up the distance in seconds. He vaulted over the ruined outer wall, landing in a street choked with screaming, fleeing people. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the dust of pulverized stone. A house to his left groaned, its foundation shattered. It began to tilt, ready to collapse onto a narrow alley where a boy with furious green eyes was dragging a girl with a black scarf. "Mikasa, hurry!" the boy yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. Naruto didn't know their names. He didn't need to. He was there in 2 leaping strides. He shoved them hard, sending them sprawling forward into the clear. "Get down!" he roared. A fraction of a second later, the 2-story house imploded where they had been standing. Timber and plaster rained down around him, but he stood over them, a shield of orange and black. The girl, Mikasa, looked up at him, her gray eyes wide with a shock that went deeper than fear. For a split second, she didn't see a person. She saw a sudden, impossible intervention. A blur of color, a strong, firm hand, and a voice that commanded obedience even in the heart of Armageddon. "My mom. Our house is this way." The boy, Eren, screamed, pointing down a street where one of the smaller, loping giants was heading. He scrambled to his feet and started running, Mikasa right behind him. Naruto glanced back at the breach. Men and women in green uniforms were zipping through the air on strange wires, engaging the giants with swords. They were brave. They were also hopelessly outmatched. He could help them. He could end this. But the boy's scream had struck a chord deep within him, a memory of another child, helpless and alone. He made his choice. He followed the kids. They rounded a corner just in time to see the scene that would be seared into his memory forever. A house lay in ruins, its roof caved in. A woman with long, dark hair was pinned beneath a heavy wooden beam, her legs crushed. And shambling toward her was a titan with a hideously wide smile and vacant eyes. A man from the garrison, his face pale with terror, stood frozen a few feet away, swords in hand but unable to move. "Mom!" Eren shrieked. The woman, Carla, saw them. Her face, a mask of agony, twisted into one of pure terror. "Eren, Mikasa, get away from here, live!" The garrison soldier, Hannes, finally broke from his paralysis, but not to fight. He scooped up Eren and Mikasa, turning to flee. "I can't," he sobbed. "I'm not brave enough. I can't face it." Naruto blew past them like a gale force wind. His mind was a storm of fury and empathy. "Not again," a voice whispered in his soul. "No more. Not in front of the kids." He didn't have the chakra for a Rasenshuriken. He barely had enough for one solid jutsu. It would have to be enough. He channeled the last accessible dregs of his and Kurama's power into his right palm. The I.R. screeched as the chakra began to rotate, compressing into a swirling, grinding sphere of brilliant blue energy. The smiling titan reached down, its massive fingers closing around the trapped woman. Naruto leapt onto the wreckage of the roof. "Rasengan!" he bellowed. He slammed the sphere into the back of the titan's neck. There was no grand explosion, no fire and smoke. There was only a concussive, annihilating whump of power. The sphere of grinding wind and chakra ripped through flesh and bone as if it were wet paper. A geyser of black, steaming blood erupted into the air, and the upper half of the titan's torso was simply obliterated. It vaporized into nothing but red mist and dissolving steam. The giant's legs buckled, and the massive corpse crashed to the ground, its lower half already beginning to disintegrate. Silence. Hannes, Eren, and Mikasa stood frozen, staring. They had seen titans killed before, a slice to the nape that took time and precision. They had never seen one annihilated. Hannes's mind simply refused to process what he had witnessed. A boy, no older than a teenager, had just held a miniature hurricane in his hand and erased a 15-meter monster from existence. Naruto landed lightly beside the rubble, the blue glow in his hand fading. He was breathing heavily, a deep tremor of exhaustion running through him. He turned to Carla, his voice firm but gentle. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Carla stared at him, her eyes wide with terror, confusion, and a dawning, unbelievable hope. She looked from the dissolving corpse of the monster to the strange, bright-eyed boy standing before her. It was like a god had fallen out of the sky. He didn't wait for an answer. He gripped the heavy beam pinning her legs. With a guttural roar, fueled by sheer willpower more than physical strength, he lifted it. It was agonizingly heavy, but he strained, muscles screaming, and hoisted it just high enough for her to be pulled free. He didn't do it himself. He looked directly at Hannes. "Get her, now," he commanded. The order shocked Hannes back into action. He scrambled forward, pulling Carla from the wreckage. Her legs were a mess, clearly broken, but she was alive. The ground shook again. More titans were pouring into the district. The screams were getting louder, more desperate. This small victory was meaningless if they all died here. Naruto gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand tall. He didn't have the power to fight them all one-on-one. Not like this, but he had another option. It would drain him completely, leave him utterly defenseless, but it was the only way. He brought his fingers together in a familiar cross seal. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. There was a series of loud, popping sounds, like 100 firecrackers going off at once. In the space of a single second, the street was filled with perfect copies of himself. 50, then 100, then 200. They flooded the area, a tide of orange and black. Eren, Mikasa, and Hannes could only stare in utter disbelief. An army had appeared from a single person. The original Naruto swayed on his feet, the world graying at the edges of his vision. He pointed toward the main evacuation route. "All right, listen up," he projected, his voice echoing through his clones. "Group 1, you're on civilian rescue. Get everyone moving toward the inner gate. Carry the injured. Don't take no for an answer. Group 2, you're on defense. Intercept any titans that get near the evacuation route. Don't kill them, just distract them. Keep them busy. Go." The clones roared a collective, "Yeah," and scattered, a blur of coordinated, purposeful action. Some began systematically clearing streets, guiding weeping families and lost children. Others leapt onto the rooftops, acting as lookouts. N of them formed a protective circle around Hannes as he carried Carla, while another clone, a medic by instinct, quickly wrapped her mangled legs in strips of torn cloth. The chaos of the evacuation began to coalesce into something resembling order. Where there had been blind panic, there was now a frantic but guided retreat. The clones were a force multiplier unlike anything this world had ever seen. They were everywhere at once. pulling people from rubble, forming human walls to block panicked stampedes, and engaging titans in baffling, hit-and-run tactics that left the giants confusedly SW. Adding at figures that would simply disappear in a puff of smoke. Amidst the swirling carnage, perched atop a distant, undamaged clock tower, a figure stood in perfect stillness. It wore a simple, heavy gray cloak, its face hidden in deep shadow. It did not move. It did not breathe. Its presence was a nullity, a patch of silence in a world of screaming. It watched the flashes of orange, the impossible multiplication of a single being. The raw, vibrant energy that flared with every action. It tilted its head, a slow, clinical motion, as if cataloging an anomaly of unprecedented scale. Then, as quietly as it had appeared, it was gone. Leaving nothing behind but the undisturbed dust on the rooftop. Naruto, the real one, was running on fumes. He felt Kurama pooling the very last of their shared reserves just to keep him conscious. He moved with the flow of the evacuation, his presence a calming focal point in the madness. His golden hair and bright jacket, once a mark of his otherness, now served as a beacon. People saw him, the boy who had appeared from nowhere and spawned an army of saviors, and they found a sliver of hope to cling to. He saw a small blonde boy struggling to help his grandfather onto the last ferry. The crowd threatening to overwhelm them. Naruto pushed his way through, his body a solid anchor in the human tide. He placed a hand on the old man's back, shielding him from the crush of bodies. "Easy now, Gramps. We'll get you on board." The boy, Armin Arlert, looked up at him with wide, intelligent blue eyes, a mixture of awe and analytical fear swirling within them. He saw the impossible hero of the hour, but he also saw someone who was bleeding exhaustion from every pore. Once they were on the deck of the ferry, the last escape from the slaughterhouse of Shiganshina. Naruto's strength finally gave out. He stumbled back against the railing, sliding down to sit on the crowded deck. The world swam. The shouts and cries of the refugees faded into a dull roar. He had done it. He had saved some of them. He had saved her, that mother. That was enough. For now, he closed his eyes, his head slumping against the cold wood. He was just a kid, he realized with a sudden, bone-deep weariness. A 17-year-old kid, torn from his own world, dropped into a nightmare, and now completely, utterly spent. He didn't see the three children who had huddled together a few feet away. Hannes had found a medic for Carla and had now left the kids on the boat, promising to return. Eren watched Naruto with a burning intensity, a toxic cocktail of gratitude, envy, and rage. That power, if he had that power, his mother would never have been in danger. Armin watched him with the cautious curiosity of a scholar discovering a new species. He was trying to reconcile E-boy who had commanded an army with the exhausted figure slumped against the railing. It didn't make sense. Nothing about him made sense. And Mikasa just stared. Her world had been shattered twice now. First, by the men who killed her parents, leaving her cold and adrift until Eren gave her a reason to live. And now today, when that reason was almost snuffed out, and the world itself had come crashing down. In the midst of that absolute terror, this strange boy had appeared. He hadn't just fought, he had protected, he had saved, he had imposed his will on reality and bent it toward preservation. He was a pillar of impossible strength in a world that had only ever shown her its weakness and cruelty. Her gaze was fixed on him, an anchor point in the churning sea of her loss and fear. The boat lurched as it pulled away from the dock, its horn blasting a mournful note of departure. Shiganshina, a tomb of stone and steam, receded behind them. When the ferry finally docked in the interior, the scene was one of quiet, shell-shocked misery. The survivors shuffled off the boat, their faces blank with trauma. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, his legs trembling. He needed to find someone in charge, explain, something. He didn't even know what he would say. "Hi, I'm from another dimension and I can make clones. Sorry about your monster problem." He didn't get the chance. As he stepped onto the stone quay, a wall of green uniforms closed in around him. Soldiers from the garrison regiment, their faces grim, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. They formed a tight circle, their fear a palpable thing, thick and sour in the air. The refugees, once drawn to him as a beacon, now shied away, pointing and whispering. "That's him. The one who made the copies. He fell from the sky, I saw it. A demon, or a god. At their head was a tall, stern-looking officer, his hand gripping the handle of his blade so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked at Naruto, at his strange clothes, his sun-kissed hair, and his otherworldly blue eyes that held a weariness far too old for his face. "Don't move," the officer commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Who are you?" Naruto looked at the ring of swords, at the fearful faces, at the terrified crowd. He was alone, drained, and in a world that saw him as either a monster or a messiah, with no room in between. He had no friends here. No allies. He had just saved hundreds of lives, and his reward was a circle of steel. He slowly raised his empty hands, a small, tired smile touching his lips. "That," he said, his voice raspy with exhaustion, "is a really good question." Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Fox and the Soldiers. 5 years. 5 years was a lifetime. It was long enough for a traumatized boy to become a vengeful young man. For a quiet girl to sharpen her devotion into a razor's edge, and for a stranger from another world to become the most dangerous and controversial secret within the walls. Naruto Uzumaki learned the rhythms of this new, caged world. He learned about the Titans, the 3 walls named Maria, Rose, and Sina, and the suffocating despair that passed for hope among its people. In turn, the military leadership learned about him, though what they learned only deepened their fear and awe. He had been taken to the capital, questioned for weeks by stern-faced men in gaudy uniforms. He told them a heavily edited version of the truth, that he came from a distant land, a place of constant warfare, and that he was caught in an enemy's technique that sent him here. He omitted the parts about tailed beasts, alien goddesses, and chakra being the literal energy of life. They wouldn't understand, and it would only make him seem more like a monster. He demonstrated high-S clone technique under controlled conditions, and the sight of one man becoming 20 was enough to nearly cause a riot among the top brass. A schism formed. The military police and the religious fanatics of the wall cult screamed for his execution or imprisonment. He was an aberration, a demon, a heretic whose very existence mocked the divinity of the walls. But Commander Erwin Smith of the SCO Regiment and Commander Pixis of the garrison saw something else. They saw a miracle. They saw a weapon. A tense compromise was reached, brokered by the pragmatic Premier Zachary. Naruto would not be imprisoned. He would live under military supervision, his freedom of movement restricted. And to prove his loyalty and to better understand the world he now inhabited, he would enlist. He would join the 104th Training Corps alongside the other refugees from the fall of Shiganshina. He would be a cadet, but everyone knew he was a prisoner on a very long leash. And so, for 3 years, he trained. The mud of the training grounds squelched under his boots. Keith Shaddis, the head instructor, a man whose voice seemed to be permanently set to a volcanic roar, circled the sparring cadets like a hawk. "What is this, Kirstein? A lover's quarrel? You're supposed to be fighting him, not trying to dance with him." Jean Kirstein, his face a mask of frustration, swung a wild right hook at Naruto. Naruto, with an expression of mild boredom, swayed his head an inch to the left. The punch whistled past his ear. He didn't counter. He just watched, his impossibly blue eyes tracking Jean's every twitch. "Stand still, you freak." Jean spat, launching into a flurry of sloppy kicks and punches. Naruto moved like water flowing around a rock. He sidestepped, ducked, and weaved, his feet barely seeming to leave the ground. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He didn't need to. Jean was defeating himself, wasting his energy on swings that meant nothing but empty air. "He's doing it again," Connie Springer muttered from the sidelines, leaning against a wooden post next to Sasha Browse, who was surreptitiously nibbling on a stolen potato. "He's not even trying," Sasha mumbled through a mouthful of starch. "It's like he knows what Jean's going to do before he does." From a few feet away, Eren Yeager watched, his fists clenched at his sides. The burning rage that had defined him since the day his mother was eaten had found a new, complex target in Naruto. The strange, golden-haired boy had saved his mother's life. Carla was alive, recovering in a small house in the Trost district, her legs permanently damaged but her spirit intact. Eren was eternally, frustratingly grateful. But he also saw Naruto as a symbol of his own weakness. Naruto possessed a power Eren couldn't comprehend, a power Hat could have prevented the fall of Shiganshina entirely if it had been there from the start. Why does he hold back? Eren growled under his breath. If he has that kind of power, why does he pretend to be one of us? Armin Arlert, standing beside him, adjusted the strap of his pack. Maybe that's the point, Eren. He's trying to be one of us. Or maybe, he's learning. He's not just watching Jin's moves. He's watching everyone. How they fight, how they talk, how they think. On the training field, Jin finally exhausted himself. He stood, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. Naruto hadn't moved from a 5-foot circle. Done? Naruto asked, his voice calm. Jin just glared, too breathless to reply. Your stance is too wide, Naruto said, his tone shifting from passive to instructive. You're telegraphing your right hook by dipping your shoulder. And you led with your face. You're fast, but you're impatient. You fight angry. Anger makes you strong, but it also makes you stupid. Shadis, who had been silent, let a grim smile touch his lips. The freak was right. Jaeger, you're up. See if you can land a single damn blow. Shadis bellowed. Eren stalked into the ring, his green eyes blazing. Don't hold back with me. Naruto, fight me for real. Naruto's placid expression hardened slightly. You don't want me to fight you for real, Eren. The words were a quiet challenge, and Eren rose to the bait. He charged, not with Jin's wild swings, but with a more focused, brawling style. He was a bulldog, relentless and aggressive. Naruto met him. He didn't just dodge this time. He parried, his forearms meeting Eren's with sharp, cracking sounds. He used his palms to deflect punches, redirecting Eren's own momentum, sending him stumbling. It was a masterclass in defensive taijutsu, something he'd learned from countless spars with Guy and Lee. To the others, it looked like a frantic, desperate defense. But to the few who were really watching, it was clear who was in control. Mikasa Ackerman watched with an unnerving stillness. Her expression was neutral, but her gaze missed nothing. She saw the minute shifts in Naruto's weight, the way he kept his center of gravity perfectly stable while Eren threw himself off balance with every attack. She saw the effortless way he moved, a grace that belied his solid frame. Annie Lenhart watched from the other side of the field, her arms crossed. Her hooded eyes cold and analytical. She wasn't watching a fight. She was watching a predator toying with its food. She saw the coiled power in Naruto's shoulders, the latent speed in his legs. She had been trained since birth to be a warrior, to see weakness and strength in a single glance. And when she looked at Naruto, she saw something that didn't fit on any scale she knew. It was like looking at a sleeping lion and trying to judge its ferocity by the twitch of its ear. Eren, frustrated and enraged, lunged, faking a punch and trying to tackle Naruto to the ground. Naruto let him come. At the last second, he sidestepped, hooked his foot behind Eren's ankle, and pushed gently on his back. Eren's own momentum did the rest. He crashed face first into the mud with a wet splat. Naruto stood over him, shaking his head. You've got the fire, Eren. But you fight with your chin. You'll get yourself killed. He offered a hand. Eren slapped it away and pushed himself up, his face smeared with mud and humiliation. I don't need your pity. Before the tense moment could escalate, Shadis's voice cracked like a whip. Enough. That's it for hand to hand. Hit the mess hall. And if I find any of you hoarding bread again, Browse, I'll make you run laps until you see the ghosts of everyone a Titan has ever eaten. A collective sigh of relief went through the corps. The cadets trudged away, exhausted and hungry. Naruto lingered for a moment, watching Eren stomp off, with Mikasa following a few paces behind like a silent shadow. He sighed. Breaking the cycle of hatred was one thing. Dealing with teenage pride was a whole different kind of battle. The mess hall was a cacophony of clattering trays and loud conversations. It was the one place the cadets could feel like normal teenagers, where the fear of being eaten was temporarily replaced by the more immediate concern of getting a second helping of stew. Naruto sat with Armin, who was animatedly discussing the flaws in the military's supply logistics. Across from them, Jean was complaining loudly to Marco Bot. It's not natural. No one moves like that. He's a monster, I'm telling you. It's no wonder the military police want him locked up. He's probably just waiting for his chance to turn on us. He saved hundreds of people at Shiganshina, Jean, Marco said gently. My own family was on that boat. They saw him. So what? Maybe that was just a trick. To get us to trust him. Naruto ignored him, used to the constant suspicion. He focused on his bread, methodically tearing it into small pieces. His enhanced senses, a lingering gift of his sage training, made the mess hall an assault. He could hear every whisper, every heartbeat, every stomach growl. He could smell the sweat, the cheap soap, and the unrelenting current of fear that never truly went away. It was exhausting. He felt a presence slide into the seat next to him. He didn't have to look to know who it was. The air around Annie Lenhart always seemed a few degrees cooler. She sat in silence, staring at her own meager portion of soup. The other cadets at the table suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere, leaving Naruto, Annie, and a nervous Armin alone. You patronize him, Annie said, her voice low and flat. She didn't look at him. Naruto stopped tearing his bread. I'm trying to teach him. You're trying to gentle a rabid dog. He doesn't want a teacher. He wants a target. He wants to tear down the world and rebuild it with his bare hands. People like that can't be taught. They can only be put down. Her words were utterly devoid of emotion. A simple statement of fact as she saw it. Armin shifted uncomfortably. That's not true. Eren is just passionate. Annie turned her cold, blue eyes on Armin, and he visibly flinched. Passion is just a pretty word for a fatal flaw. In this world, it gets you and everyone around you killed. The only thing that matters is survival. Naruto met her gaze. He had faced down killers, zealots, and gods. Her detached nihilism didn't intimidate him. It just made him sad. You really believe that, don't you? It's the only truth there is, she replied. The world is cruel. The strong prey on the weak. The best you can do is make sure you're not on the menu. Sounds like a pretty miserable way to live, Naruto said, popping a piece of bread into his mouth. And a lonely one. A flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossed her face. It's realistic. No, Naruto said, his voice surprisingly firm. It's an excuse. It's something someone tells themselves so they don't have to try to make things better. It's easier to say the world is garbage than it is to try and clean it up. He leaned forward slightly. So who told you that, Annie? Who convinced you that just surviving is enough? Her eyes narrowed. He had struck a nerve. No one talked to her like this. They either feared her, avoided her, or, in the case of Reiner, awkwardly flirted with her. No one had ever tried to dissect her. You know nothing about me, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. I know what I see, Naruto countered, his gaze unwavering. I see someone who is strong, maybe one of the strongest people here. And I see someone who's convinced herself that her strength is only for her. I think that's a waste. Before she could reply, Reiner Braun slid onto the bench next to her, slinging a thick arm around her shoulder. Hey, Annie, leave these guys alone. You're scaring poor Armin. He grinned, a broad, friendly, big brother smile that never quite reached his eyes. Don't mind her, Naruto. Her bark is worse than her bite. Annie immediately stiffened, shrugging his arm off. Don't touch me. Berthold Hoover, tall and perpetually nervous, hovered behind Reiner like a shadow. He gave Naruto a hesitant nod, his eyes darting around as if expecting a titan to crash through the wall at any moment. Naruto's gaze flickered between the three of them. The big, friendly soldier. The tall, anxious one. The small, deadly one. He'd seen acts like this before in Konoha's Anbu. They were playing roles. He wasn't sure what their goal was, but their camaraderie felt rehearsed, their identities a carefully constructed lie. He'd known it from the moment he met them. He just didn't know why. So he watched. And he waited. Just having a conversation, Reiner, Naruto said, leaning back. We were talking about the meaning of life. Deep stuff. Reiner laughed, a little too loudly. The meaning of life. It's simple. You join the military police, get a cushy spot in the interior, and try not to get eaten. Right, Jean, he called across the room. Jean, glad to be included, raised his cup. Someone who gets it. You hear that, Jaeger? That's what a smart soldier does. Eren slammed his fists on the table. You cowards. While you're hiding in the interior, the scouts will be retaking our home. We're going to kill every last Titan. The familiar argument erupted, sucking the air out of the room. Naruto tuned it out. He looked back at Annie, who had used the distraction to retreat back into her shell, her face an unreadable mask once more. But he had seen that flicker. He had planted a seed of doubt. It was a start. Later that night, long after the barracks had fallen silent, Naruto slipped out. The moon was a bright sliver in the sky, casting long shadows across the training grounds. He found her where he knew she would be. In a small, secluded clearing behind the mess hall, Mikasa moved through a series of fluid, brutal motions. She had two of the wooden training knives in her hands. And she spun and slashed at an imaginary foe, her movements precise and deadly. She wasn't just practicing. She was communing with her own strength, a solitary ritual. He watched for a moment, appreciating her form. She fought with an economy of motion that was beautiful in its efficiency. Every strike was a killing blow. He stepped into the clearing. You'll wear yourself out before you even graduate. She didn't startle. She finished her sequence, ending with a low lunge, and then straightened up, turning to face him. A light sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead. The red scarf N had given her all those years ago was a stark slash of color against the drabness of her uniform. I need to be stronger, she said. Her voice was soft, but held a core of unbendable steel. You're already the strongest person in the 104th, he said simply. It wasn't a compliment, it was a statement of fact. I'm not. She glanced in the direction of the boys' barracks. You are. I'm different. That's not the same as being strong, he said, walking closer. Can I show you something? She gave a hesitant nod. That spin you do, he began, the one into the reverse grip slash. It's fast. You're exposed for a split second right here. He gently tapped her left side, just below her ribs. Your momentum carries you too far. If your opponent is fast enough, they can get inside your guard. She frowned, replaying the motion in her mind. She knew he was right. She had felt the slight imbalance herself. Tuck your elbow closer to your body on the turn, he instructed. And don't commit all your weight to the spin. Keep your back foot anchored. It'll make the slash a fraction of a second slower, but you'll be able to recover instantly for a block or another attack. It's not about the single deadliest move. It's about the flow between moves. He picked up a fallen branch. Here. Try it on me. She hesitated. I might hurt you. A genuine, warm smile spread across his face, and for a moment, the weary, guarded stranger was replaced by a boy his age. Mikasa, I promise you, that's not something you need to worry about. They sparred. It wasn't like his bout with Eren. This was a dance. He didn't hold back his skill, only his overwhelming physical advantages. He met her attacks, his branch deflecting her wooden knives. He moved with her, forcing her to adapt, to counter, to think beyond her ingrained patterns. He pushed her, challenged her, and treated her not as a delicate girl or a protective bodyguard, but as a warrior, an equal. After nearly an hour, they stood panting in the center of the clearing. The air crisp and cool around them. You learn fast, he said, impressed. You are a good teacher, she replied, her usual monotone softened by exertion and something else, respect. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Why do you do it? He asked quietly. All this training. You're already good enough to get into the military police. You could live a safe life in the interior. Her gaze hardened, and she looked away. I have to protect Eren. Why? The question seemed to throw her. He's my family. He saved me. He gave me this scarf. She clutched the red fabric. I owe him everything. Quote, he's lucky to have you, Naruto said. But is that all you are? His protector. What happens when he doesn't need protecting anymore? What does Mikasa want? She stared at him, her gray eyes wide and searching. No one had ever asked her that. Not her adoptive parents, not Eren, not anyone. Her entire identity since the day her parents were murdered had been wrapped up in her devotion to Eren. The question left a void, a space she didn't know how to fill. I don't know, she whispered, the admission sounding foreign on her own tongue. Well, Naruto said, giving her a small, encouraging smile. Maybe it's time you started thinking about it. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, he said, his back to her. I think the world would Be a lot better off if you were using that strength to protect more than just one person. He walked away, leaving her alone in the moonlight, the wooden knives feeling heavy in her hands and a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. The summons came 2 days later. A grim-faced soldier from the garrison escorted him to the Trost district headquarters, a stone fortress that served as the nerve center for Wall Rose. He was led into a large, circular chamber. At a massive wooden table sat the 3 most powerful men in the military. Commander Erwin Smith, with his calm, calculating eyes and air of implacable resolve. Commander Pixis, an old, bald man with a flask never far from his hand and a mind as sharp as any blade. And opposing them, Nile Dok, commander of the military police. His face a permanent mask of sour disapproval. Naruto Uzumaki, Erwin began, his voice smooth and even. Thank you for coming. Didn't have much of a choice, Naruto said, gesturing to the 2 armed guards at the door. Pixis let out a short, wheezing laugh. The boy has a point, Erwin. Let's dispense with the pleasantries. Nile here is petitioning Premier Zachary to have you moved to a secure facility in the capital. Permanently. Nile slammed his hand on the table. He is a danger to us all. His power is unnatural. We know nothing about him, where he came from, or what he's capable of. For 5 years he has lived among us, and he is still a complete unknown. He's a lit fuse, and we are fools for letting him walk free. He is a cadet in the 104th who has followed every order given to him, Erwin countered coolly. His instructors report he is an exemplary, if unconventional, soldier. He's toying with you, Nile shot back. Shadis's reports say he holds back constantly. He could kill every cadet in that camp with a snap of his fingers, and we all know it. That display in Shiganshina, it was a heresy. Power like that doesn't belong in the hands of a man. It belongs to God, and to the walls. Naruto had heard this argument 100 times. He was tired of it. Do you want to know what I'm capable of, Commander Dok? Naruto asked, his voice cutting through the argument. The room fell silent. Nile stared at him, his face flushed with anger. I'm capable of leaving, Naruto said, his gaze hard. You think these walls can hold me? You think your soldiers can stop me? They can't. If I wanted to go, I'd be gone, and you'd never even see me leave. The only reason I am still here is because I chose to be here. I am here because this world, as messed up as it is the only one I have right now. And because I don't like watching innocent people get eaten by mindless monsters. Pixis took a long pull from his flask, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well said. Erwin leaned forward, his hands steepled. Nile's concerns, while zealously expressed, are not entirely without merit. We don't know the limits of your abilities. And your presence is a source of political instability. We need to demonstrate your value. And your loyalty, unequivocally. What do you have in mind? Naruto asked, already knowing this was leading somewhere. A final, large Kale training exercise for the 104th before their graduation, Erwin explained. A week-long field test in the forests between Trost and the old border of Wall Maria. They will be split into 2 teams. Their objective will be to secure a designated ruin deep in the forest. They will be armed with signal flares and blunted training blades. It is a test of their strategy, their endurance, and their ability to work as a team. And my role in this? You will not be on either team, Erwin said, his eyes gleaming with intellectual fervor. You will be a third party. An independent operative. Your objective will be the same as theirs. But you will be alone. However, we are placing a restriction on you. One that you have already placed on yourself. You are forbidden from engaging in direct combat. You may defend yourself, but you are not to be the aggressor. Naruto raised an eyebrow. So you want me to win without fighting? I want to see how you win, Erwin corrected. Your performance in Shiganshina was overwhelming force. It was impressive, but it was also chaotic. I want to see your mind at work, Uzumaki. I want to see the tactician, not just the weapon. Show us that your greatest asset isn't the hurricane in your hand, but the mind that guides it. Nile scoffed. This is a ridiculous game. It is a necessary test, Pixis countered, setting his flask down. If the boy succeeds, he proves he is a strategic asset beyond measure. If he fails, it proves he is reliant on his monstrous power and gives credence to your concerns, Nile. For one, I'm intensely curious to see the outcome. Naruto thought for a moment. It was a test, but it was also an opportunity. An opportunity to show them that he was more than just a nuke to be aimed. There's one more condition, Naruto said. Erwin raised a brow. Oh, my clones. You said I can't engage in direct combat. But my clones are an extension of myself. I want permission to use them. Not for fighting. For reconnaissance. For communication. Erwin's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of thinking he had hoped to see. Naruto wasn't looking for a loophole to fight. He was looking for a way to utilize his unique skills for strategy. Permission granted, Erwin said immediately, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Within the established parameters. No direct combat. Is that understood, Crystal? Naruto replied. 3 days later, the exercise began. The 104th was deep in the Titanless forest south of Trost. They were split into a red team, led by Marco, and a blue team, nominally led by Ren due to his sheer force of will. Naruto was dropped off miles from both of them, given a map, a compass, and a single red flare, the same as the objective marker. His task was to get to the ruined castle in the center of the forest and light his flare before either of the other teams could light theirs. For the first day, he did nothing. He found a high branch in a tall tree, sat down, and closed his eyes. He wasn't resting. He was expanding his senses. He created 10 shadow clones. They were not for show. They were for work. Spread out. He ordered them quietly. 5-mile radius. Don't be seen. Track both teams. I want to know their numbers. Their direction of travel, their supply status, and who their key decision makers are. Report back by dispelling. Go. The clones melted into the forest. For the next 2 days, Naruto became a living command and control center. He sat in meditation, a constant stream of information flowing into his mind as his clones observed from the shadows. A clone, hidden in the brush, watched Jean and Eren get into a shouting match that split the blue team into 2 factions. The clone dispelled. Information received. Blue team is internally fractured. Jaeger is emotional and aggressive. Kirstein is pragmatic but prideful. They're moving too fast, wasting energy. Another clone, perched like a squirrel in a tree, observed Marco calmly directing the red team. They were moving slower, more methodically, conserving their rations and mapping their route. The clone dispelled. Information received. Red team is unified under bot. Cohesive, but cautious. Their pace is too slow. He learned their patterns. Blue team, led by Eren's aggressive pushes, would forge ahead in a straight line, while Jean's faction would argue for a more circuitous, safer route. Red team was avoiding all difficult terrain, sticking to clear paths, which made them predictable. On the 3rd day, Naruto began to move. He sent a single, unarmed clone toward blue team's path. The clone stumbled out into the open, feigning injury. Hey, I need help, the clone shouted. Eren's squad, at the head of the blue team, immediately drew their training blades. It's Naruto, Connie yelled. What do we do? He's alone, and he looks hurt. We capture him. Eren roared, charging forward. The clone let them get close, then simply turned and ran. Not with Naruto's true speed, but just fast enough to be an irresistible target. Eren, with Mikasa and Armin in tow, gave chase, their competitive instincts overriding their strategic sense. The clone led them on a wild goose chase for hours, pulling the most aggressive and skilled members of the blue team miles off course. Meanwhile, another clone initiated a similar distraction with the red team, using sounds and feints to make them believe a large force was flanking them from the east, forcing them into a defensive, westward path, directly away from the objective. While the 2 main teams were busy chasing ghosts and shadows, the real Naruto was moving unimpeded through the forest, following a direct, calculated path toward the castle. He was a ghost, his movements silent, his path cleared by the chaos his clones were sowing miles away. The Saw's TLE ruins came into view on the 5th day. It was an old, crumbling stone fortress on a small hill. He could see the designated flagpole on its highest battlement. He was about to make his final ACH when a fresh piece of intel arrived in his mind with the force of a psychic shock. A clone, left to observe the remnants of blue team, had just dispelled. Annie, Reiner, and Bertholdt have broken off from the main group. They're not chasing the distraction. They ignored it. They're moving directly for the objective. Fast. Naruto stopped. He had underestimated them. Or rather, he had underestimated Annie. She wouldn't fall for a simple emotional lure like Eren. She was a pure pragmatist. She would have seen the chase for the distraction it was. And she, Reiner, and Bertholdt were moving with a military efficiency that dwarfed the other cadets. They were a problem. They would reach the castle before he could. And Erwin's rules were clear. No direct combat. He stood for a moment, processing. He couldn't fight them, but he could outthink them. He created 5 more clones. Plan B, he said to them. You 3, get to the west side of the castle. Start making noise. A lot of it. Make think a whole team is launching an assault from that direction. You 2, with me. He and his 2 clones circled around to the east, the opposite side of the feint. They crept to the base of the crumbling castle wall. He could hear the shouts and clangs as his other clones began their assault. As he'd predicted, he heard Reiner's voice from above, directing Annie and Bertholdt to the west wall to repel the attackers. Now, Naruto whispered. He crouched down, linking his hands together to form a foothold. 1 clone stepped into his hands. With a surge of chakra-enhanced strength, Naruto launched the clone straight up the wall. The clone sailed 20 feet into the air, caught a handhold, and began scrambling up the sheer stone face. Halfway up, that clone created its own foothold, launching the second clone even higher. It was a chain reaction, a human ladder. In less than 10 seconds, the final clone was at the top of the battlement, right next to the flagpole. Annie, Reiner, and Bertholdt, realizing the sounds from the west were a diversion, were sprinting back across the courtyard. They were too late. The clone at the top of the tower didn't light the flare. It just grinned, gave them a jaunty wave, and then looked down at the real Naruto, who was still at the base of the wall. All clear. The clone shouted, and dispelled in a puff of smoke. Naruto took out his flare gun, aimed it at the sky, and fired. A brilliant red plume erupted into the afternoon sky, a beacon of victory that could be seen for miles. He had won. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He hadn't broken a single rule. He had defeated 99 cadets using nothing but his mind, a handful of clones for reconnaissance, and a deep understanding of his opponent's weaknesses. From a watchtower 5 miles away, Commander Erwin Smith lowered his binoculars. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face. He had his answer. Naruto Uzumaki wasn't just a nuke. He was a grandmaster, and he was place. Eyeing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. That night, back in the barracks, the mood was sullen. Naruto sat on his bunk, cleaning his gear, ignoring the glares from Eren and Jean. But as he worked, he felt a presence and looked up. Annie Lenhart was standing in front of him. Her arms were crossed, her face impassive. But her eyes, for the first time, held no condescension. They held a grudging, analytical respect. That was a good strategy, she said, her voice a low murmur. Thanks, he replied, genuinely surprised she was speaking to him. You used his ego against him, she continued, nodding toward Eren. You used their caution against them. She looked him straight in the eye. But you couldn't predict me. No, Naruto admitted. You 3 were unexpected. I had to adapt. She held his gaze for a long moment. You are not like them. You don't think like them. I still don't know what you are. I'm just me, Annie. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if dismissing his answer. She turned and walked away without another word, leaving him with the distinct feeling that he hadn't won an opponent, but had instead earned the focused, dangerous curiosity of a fellow predator. He laid back on his bunk, exhausted not from the physical exertion, but from the mental gymnastics of the past week. He had proven his point to Erwin. He had further intrigued Annie and confused Mikasa. He had enraged Eren. It was progress, of a sort. He closed his eyes, hoping for a dreamless sleep. But the dreams always came. He wasn't in the forest anymore. He was floating in a vast, limitless expanse of absolute nothing. There were no stars, no light, no sound. It was a perfect, crushing silence, a void so profound it felt like it had weight. It was the antithesis of the vibrant, chaotic natural energy he had once known. This was the energy of non-existence. He felt a pull, a slow, gravitational tug toward the center of the void, where the blackness was somehow even deeper. Even more absolute. He felt a dispassionate curiosity directed at him. It wasn't malevolent, not in a way he could understand. It was like a scientist observing a microbe. It was cold, ancient, anomaly. The word wasn't spoken. It was an impression, a feeling that permeated the nothingness. A discordant note in the silent song. He struggled against the pull, his dream self kicking and fighting. He had to get away. He had to wake up. This place felt more dangerous than Kagaya, more terrifying than any titan. The silence will be restored. He woke up with a gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was drenched in a cold sweat, the thin blanket tangled around his legs. The barracks were dark and quiet, filled with the soft breathing of sleeping cadets. He sat up, running a hand through his hair. It was just a nightmare. Trauma from the dimensional tear that brought him here. That's what he told himself. That's what he had been telling himself for years. But as he stared into the darkness, the feeling of that cold, silent void lingered. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a dream. It was a premonition. Something was watching him from across the abyss. And it was getting closer. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Unbreakable Wall and the Broken Girl. Graduation day was a somber affair. The top 10 cadets were announced, their futures laid out before them. A safe, corrupt life in the military police. Or a short, glorious one in the scout regiment. Mikasa, as expected, was first. Reiner, Bertholdt, Annie, they were all there. Eren, through sheer, grit-toothed determination, had clawed his way into the top 10 as well. Naruto was not on the list. His performance in the final exercise had been classified by Erwin Smith himself. To the rest of the Corps, he was the enigma who had simply vanished during the test and reappeared at the end, having won by unknown means. He stood with the unranked graduates, a silent figure in the crowd, his face unreadable. He had chosen his path long ago. There was only one option for him. He would join the scouts. He would go beyond the walls, not just to fight titans, but to search for any sign, any clue, that might lead him home. Eren stood before them all, his speech a fiery sermon of vengeance and determination, his voice ringing with the passion that Annie so disdained. He was joining the scouts. And in a moment of shocking solidarity, almost all of his friends, Armin, Connie, Sasha, even Marco, chose to follow him. They had been through too much to separate now. Naruto watched them, a strange mix of pride and apprehension twisting in his gut. They were good kids. They were his friends. And they were marching off to die. He was standing on the wall of Trost, the wind whipping through his jacket, looking out over the town he now, begrudgingly, called home. Below, the new graduates were on cleanup duty, polishing cannons, their brief moment of defiant hope replaced by the mundane reality of military life. He was waiting for Erwin to officially sign his enlistment papers. Then the world shook. It was the same sound from 5 years ago. A flash of impossible light just outside the gate, a concussive boom that rattled the stones of Wall Rose itself, and a plume of steam that rose to the heavens. A gasp went through the soldiers on the wall. A collective, indrawn breath of pure, recycled terror. And then, just as before, a face appeared over the top. The colossal titan, skinless, immense, its vapid eyes staring at nothing. It was back. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Soldiers stared, air minds refusing to accept the nightmare made manifest. Then, the titan moved. Its massive foot swung, not at the gate this time, but at the cannons on top of the wall. Scatter! Naruto roared, his voice cutting through the paralyzed silence. His warning came a second too late. The foot connected with the wall, sending soldiers, cannons, and multi-ton chunks of stone flying like shrapnel. The shockwave threw Naruto back, but he twisted in midair, landed on his feet, and pushed off again, a blur of orange. He snatched 2 tumbling cadets from the air, Thomas and Mina, tucking them under his arms and landing safely on the inner walkway as the titan's leg vanished in another cloud of steam. Chaos erupted. The breach was made. The training was over. The real war had just begun. It's Shiganshina all over again. A soldier screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. No, it's not, Naruto said, his voice cold and hard. He placed the two trembling cadets on their feet. He looked at the new, gaping hole in the wall. At the titans that were already beginning to shamble through. He looked at the panicked, terrified faces of the new graduates below. He felt a surge of chakra, Kurama's fiery energy rising to meet his own. A familiar, comforting inferno. Ready, Kurama, let's show them what real power looks like, Kit. Naruto brought his hands together in the cross seal. It was time to stop holding back. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. In a thunderclap of smoke, the entire top of Wall Rose was suddenly flooded with 1,000 Naruto Uzumakis. They were a sea of orange and black, 1,000. Identical faces set with grim determination. The sheer, impossible sight of it stopped the panic dead. Soldiers and cadets alike just stared, their minds short-circuiting. The original Naruto, standing in the center of his clone army, pointed a commanding finger at the breach. 80% of you, get down into the city. We are not losing trust. Your job is civilian evacuation. Create a perimeter, clear the streets, get every man, woman, and child to the evacuation point. No casualties. Is that understood? Yeah, the clones roared, their collective voice a physical force. The rest of you, with me. We're going to hold that breach. Move out. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Hundreds of clones leapt from the top of the wall, fanning out into the city below. They moved, with a speed and agility that made the ODM gear look like a child's toy. They became a citywide nervous system, an unstoppable force of order in the heart of chaos. Meanwhile, the real Naruto, flanked by 200 of his copies, sprinted along the top of the wall toward the breach. The cadets of the 104th, jolted from their shock, could only watch in stunned amazement. What is he? Connie stammered. Eren stared, his hands trembling. This was the power he had sensed, the power Naruto had kept hidden. It wasn't just strength, it was omnipresence. That's the man who saved my mother. Mikasa's eyes were locked on the original, a tiny point of focus in the sea of orange. Her heart was hammering in her chest, a strange mix of terror for the situation and a profound, overwhelming sense of security. Naruto was here, and this time, he wasn't holding back. Down in the streets, the clones were a whirlwind of efficiency. They dropped into panicked crowds, their calm, authoritative voices cutting through the hysteria. This way, the west gate is the safest route. You, ma'am, give me your children. I'll get them over the wall. Medic, we have injured over here. They formed human chains, they carried the elderly. They bodily lifted wagons over rubble. And when a titan lumbered into a square filled with fleeing civilians, a dozen clones would instantly engage it. They swarmed it like angry hornets, not to kill, but to distract. They ran up its legs, they threw rocks at its face, they shouted insults at it. The mindless giants, overwhelmed by the sheer number of fast-moving targets, would be drawn away from the crowds, swatting uselessly at figures that would simply disappear in a puff of smoke, only to be replaced by 3 more. At the breach, Naruto and his combat squad met the incoming tide of titans head-on. Do not let a single one get further into the city, Naruto commanded. He formed a Rasengan in his hand, the familiar blue sphere a beacon of deadly power. He leapt from the wall, directly at a 10-meter titan that was trying to climb over the rubble. He slammed the Rasengan into its face, and its head simply ceased to exist. He landed on its dissolving shoulder, already scanning for his next target. His clones followed his lead, but they didn't have the chakra for Rasengans. They used pure taijutsu and teamwork. 10 clones would swarm a single titan, using their combined strength to wrestle it to the ground, while another would use a sharpened piece of rubble or a discarded sword to gouge out its nape. Their losses were irrelevant. For every nay that was smashed or grabbed and dissipated, 2 more would take its place. They were an inexhaustible, fearless army. From a command post on the far side of the wall, the grizzled garrison captains watched, their mouths agape. The initial, desperate defense plan had been thrown into utter disarray. There was no vanguard, no middle guard, no rear guard. There was just Naruto. He was the entire army. By the walls, Kits Woerman, the perpetually terrified captain of the garrison, whispered. What is he? He is victory. Pixis said, a slow, wolfish grin spreading across his face as he watched the battle through a spyglass. He is the living embodiment of victory. But even with 1,000 clones, the city was large, and the Titans were numerous. The civilian evacuation was proceeding, but it was slow. Too many people were trapped in the winding inner streets. Naruto, standing on a rooftop, closed his eyes, ignoring the chaos around him. He drew on the natural energy, what little of it there was, and sank into sage mode. The world exploded into a symphony of sensory information. He could feel every life force in the city. The large, dull, stupid presences of the Titans. The small, frantic sparks of the humans. The panicked heartbeats of the horses. And the steady, familiar thrum of his own clones. He became a one-man sensory network for the entire district. Clone at Sector 4. There's a family of 3 trapped in the bakery cellar. He projected, his voice echoing in the minds of his copies. Clone at Sector 7. An aberrant is approaching from the south. Intercept it. Mikasa, Eren, you're about to be flanked by 5 meters from the east. Miles away, Mikasa, who was cutting her way through the Titans with a cold fury, heard his voice as a clear thought in her head. She paused, her eyes widening. She spun, her ODM gear firing, and intercepted a Titan that had been just about to grab Eren from his blind spot. She sliced its nape, her movements flawless, her mind reeling. How? Naruto opened his eyes, the orange pigment of sage mode stark around them. He had a complete picture of the battlefield. But it was too big. The distractions weren't enough. He needed to clear a path. A big one. He created 2 more clones. They stood back to back with him, each holding out a hand. He poured his chakra into them, the wind screaming around them. Sage art. Massive Recentrican. A colossal, shrieking disk of wind and chakra formed above them, a miniature sun of pure destructive power. It was so large it blotted out the sky, its sound a deafening roar. He drowned out even the Titan's footsteps. He and his clones hurled it. It flew over the rooftops, a spinning vortex of death, and descended upon a wide street packed with a dozen Titans that were blocking the main evacuation route. The explosion was not fire and brimstone. It was a silent, cellular annihilation. The Recentrican expanded into a dome of countless microscopic wind blades. The Titans within the dome didn't even have time to steam. They were simply erased, atomized on a fundamental level. When the light faded, a 100-meter stretch of the street was utterly clear, the cobblestones scoured clean. The effect on morale was seismic. The fleeing civilians, who had seen an impassable wall of monsters, now saw a clear path to safety, carved by a divine hand. They surged forward, their hope renewed. But the cost was immense. The moment the jutsu was complete, Naruto fell to one knee, breathing heavily. Sage mode faded, and he was back to his own reserves. He was powerful, but he wasn't infinite. A jutsu of that scale had taken a massive toll. It was then that he felt it. A flare of familiar chakra. Strong, raging, but wrong. It was Eren's signature, but it was twisted, monstrous. It was coming from the center of the city, where he'd last sensed him being overwhelmed. He looked, and saw it. A 15-meter Titan, but unlike any he'd seen before. This one had purpose. It had long, dark hair, pointed ears, and a muscular physique. And it was rampaging, yes, but it was only attacking other Titans. It tore one apart with its bare hands, then crushed another's head with a brutal stomp. Eren. Naruto felt a spike of alarm. He saw garrison soldiers, led by the panicky Kitswoerman, surrounding the rogue Titan, their cannons aimed. They saw a monster. Naruto sensed a human heart beating within the beast. A frantic, confused, raging soul. No, you idiots, Naruto snarled. He created a new clone and sent it hurtling toward the scene. The clone landed directly between the garrison's cannons and the attack Titan. Stand down, it ordered. It's a Titan. It will turn on us. Woerman shrieked, his face slick with sweat. Fire, I said, stand down. The clone roared, flaring its chakra. The raw pressure washed over the soldiers, making them stagger. That is not your enemy. It's fighting for you. The attack Titan, meanwhile, was exhausted. It had just finished killing the last Titan in the area and now stood panting, steam pouring from its body. It swayed, then collapsed to its knees. A figure emerged from its nape, enveloped in steam, Eren Yeager, alive. Mikasa was the first to reach him. her ODM gear carrying her to his side in a flash. She cradled his unconscious form, her face a mask of disbelief and fierce relief. Armin was right behind her. But Woerman and his men were not convinced. They saw a boy emerge from a titan. It was unnatural. A devil. It's a trick. They're monsters. All of them. Woerman screamed, his fear overriding all reason. He raised his sword. Prepare to fire. Kill them all. The cannon fuse was lit. Mikasa stood over Eren, her blades drawn, ready to die to protect him. Armin stood before the cannon, his arms spread wide, his voice shaking but resolute as he tried to reason with them. It wasn't enough. The fear was too great. Just as the cannon fired, a blur of orange and black appeared in front of them. The real Naruto, having raced across the city, stood before them. He held up a single hand. A shimmering, transparent barrier of golden chakra erupted in front of him, shaped like the torso of a skeletal fox. It was Kurama's power, a small-scale Susanoo. The cannonball slammed into the chakra shield and exploded harmlessly. Silence. The soldiers stared, their minds breaking for the third or fourth time that day. This boy, he hadn't just created an army. He hadn't just vaporized a dozen titans. Now he had manifested a golden demon to shield his friends. Naruto let the chakra fade, his face set like stone. He was bone-tired. The constant use of clones, the Rasenshuriken, and now Kurama's chakra had drained him to his limits. But he stood tall, an immovable object. He is a human soldier, Naruto said, his voice dangerously low, gesturing to the unconscious Eren. And he is under my protection. You will not harm him. You will not harm any of my comrades. Is that clear, Captain? Woerman could only tremble and nod. His authority completely shattered. It was then that Commander Pixis arrived, landing on the rooftop above them. He had seen the whole thing. He looked from the Golden Guardian to the boy emerging from a titan. And his grin was wider than ever. Magnificent, he declared. Absolutely magnificent. I've had a few crazy ideas in my time, but this is a gift from the gods. He looked down at Armin. Cadet Arlert, you believe we can use this power? This, Titan boy, Armin, startled, laid out his desperate, brilliant plan, to have Eren, in his Titan form, carry the massive bolt. That had been prepared for just such a scenario and use it to seal the breach in Trost's gate. It was insane. It was desperate. It was their only hope. Pixis loved it. But there was a problem. When Eren transformed again, he was not in control. He mindlessly attacked Mikasa, and then, after injuring himself, sat inert, unresponsive. The plan was failing. The Titans were starting to break through. The clones, thinning defense at the breach. It's no good. He's not responding. One of the elite guards shouted. We have to abandon the plan. Naruto watched from a nearby rooftop. He could sense Eren's consciousness, lost in a dream. Unable to take control, he sighed. Always has to be the hard way. He leapt down, landing next to the massive, steaming attack titan. Mikasa, Armin, get back. He placed a hand on the titan's leg. It was like touching a furnace. He closed his eyes, focused, and sent a pulse of his own chakra directly into Eren's body, a technique he'd learned for breaking genjutsu. He didn't shout. He sent a single, clear thought, carried on the wave of chakra. Eren, get up. Your mother is alive because I was there. But these people, your comrades, your friends, they're going to die if you don't get up right now. You wanted to kill all the titans. Then get up and prove it. Be the hero they need you to be. Inside the titan, Eren's dream state shattered. The image of Naruto's determined face, clear as day, broke through his subconscious fog. The words hit him like a physical blow. He was right. He had to get up. The attack titan's eyes snapped open, glowing with a renewed, ferocious green light. It let out a deafening roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated willpower. It turned, ignored the soldiers, and stomped toward the massive boulder. With a groan of protesting muscle and steam, it hoisted the giant rock onto its shoulders. The plan was back on. But as Eren began his slow, agonizing march to the gate, the titans seemed to sense the shift. They broke past the last of Naruto's exhausted clones and began to converge on the attack titan, a wave of hungry flesh. Protect him. Ian Dietrich of the elite guard roared. Give your hearts for humanity. The UTS and garrison soldiers threw themselves at the Titans, a desperate, suicidal charge to buy Eren the time he needed. They were dying, snatched from the air, crushed underfoot. Naruto watched for a single second, his heart aching at the sacrifice. Then his jaw tightened. No, he looked at the boulder. Even for a Titan, it was too much. Eren was faltering, his steps slowing, the rock threatening to crush him. I'm not losing anyone else today, Naruto muttered. He vanished in a burst of speed, reappearing on the other side of the giant boulder. He placed his palms flat against the cold, rough stone, opposite Eren. A little help, Kurama, just push, Kit. Golden chakra flared around him, visible even in the bright daylight. He bent his knees and pushed. The cadets on the rooftops watched, their jaws slack. The small, orange-clad figure was pushing on the boulder with as much force as the 15-meter Titan on the other side. And incredibly, it began to move faster. The combined force of the boy god and the boy monster propelled the colossal rock forward at a steady, inexorable pace. The sight was so fundamentally reality-breaking that even the Titans seemed to pause in their mindless advance. They reached the breach. With a final, unified roar of effort, Eren and Naruto shoved the boulder into the gaping hole. It slammed into place with a ground-shaking boom, sealing the gate. Light of the outside world was cut off. For the first time in human history, a lost wall had been reclaimed. Eren collapsed, his Titan form dissolving around him. Naruto fell to his knees, his own energy reserves utterly and completely depleted. The golden chakra faded, leaving him pale and trembling. He had pushed his body and his spirit to their absolute breaking point and beyond. The surviving soldiers stood in stunned silence, looking at the sealed gate. Then, a single, hesitant cheer went up. Then another. Then the entire city seemed to erupt in a victorious, weeping roar. They had won. It was a miracle. A bloody, costly, impossible miracle. In the aftermath, as the last of the trapped Titans were being hunted down, the city was a strange mix of celebration and mourning. The ground was littered with bodies, both human and Titan, but the wall was sealed. Naruto was sitting on a pile of rubble, trying to catch his breath, when a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Mikasa. Her face was smudged with soot and blood. Her uniform was torn, but her eyes were clear. She knelt in front of him, her expression uncharacteristically soft. "You're hurt," she said. It wasn't a question. She could see the deep, soul-deep exhaustion in his eyes, the way his hands were trembling. "I'm fine," he lied, trying to give her a reassuring grin. It came out as a grimace. She didn't argue. She simply reached out, her movements hesitant, and gently brushed a stray lock of golden hair from his forehead. Her fingers were warm against his skin. It was a small, simple gesture, but it was filled with a depth of feeling that words could never capture. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For Eren. For all of us." Before he could respond, her composure, held together by sheer willpower for the entire battle, finally shattered. The terror of the day, the fear of losing Eren, the shock of seeing Naruto wield the power of a god and then collapse, it all came crashing down on her. Her eyes welled up with tears, her lower lip trembled, and with a choked sob, she lunged forward, wrapping her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He was startled by the sudden embrace, the raw desperation in it. This was not the stoic, unshakable Mikasa he knew. This was a terrified girl who had been pushed past her limit. Her body trembled against his, and he could feel her tears soaking through his jacket. He hesitated for only a second before wrapping his own arms around her, holding her securely. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He just held her, offering what little comfort and strength he had left, a silent, solid presence in the wreckage of the city they had just saved together. Her entire world had just been turned upside down, but in that moment, clinging to the impossible boy who had held back the apocalypse, she felt, for the first time, truly safe. From a shadowed alleyway 100 yards away, another figure watched them. Nnie Lenhart stood with her back against a brick wall, her arms crossed. She had fought. She had killed Titans. She had fulfilled her duty as a soldier of the 104th. But she had done it all with a cold, detached efficiency. Then she had watched Naruto. She saw him create an army from nothing. She saw him level a city block with a thought. She saw him shield her comrades with a phantom of golden energy. And she had seen him, a single boy, push a rock with the same force as a titan. He was not human. He was something else entirely. A power that dwarfed her own, that dwarfed the power of the titans she served. He was a variable that her masters in Marley had never, could never have, accounted for. He was a walking god of destruction who chose, inexplicably, to be a protector. He fought with a ferocity she respected, but he saved lives with a compassion she could not comprehend. And now she watched him holding Mikasa, offering a quiet comfort that seemed so at odds with the cataclysmic power he had just unleashed. He was an anomaly, a monster, a savior, and as she watched the two of them, a strange, unfamiliar, and deeply unsettling emotion stirred in her chest. It was a bitter, aching pang that she couldn't name. It was jealousy, and it terrified her. She turned and melted back into the shadows, her mind a whirlwind of conflict. Her mission, her duty, her entire worldview, had been shattered by the existence of one impossible, golden-haired boy. The massive chakra Naruto had expended throughout the Battle of Trost did not go unnoticed. It was more than a beacon, it was a supernova in the silent, dark dimensions between worlds. Miles above the stratosphere, in the cold, thin air where reality wore thin, a shimmer of distorted space appeared. It was a pinprick, a wound in the fabric of the universe. From this wound, a presence emerged. It was not the silent observer from Shiganshina. This was something more, a silenced agent, drawn by the sheer magnitude of the energy release, made a closer inspection. For a fraction of a second, it was visible to a scout with a spyglass perched on the highest point of Wall Rose, a man who would later be dismissed as delirious from stress. He saw a pocket of the city, right where the Recentrican had gone off, seemed to freeze. He saw titans that were already dissolving stop. They didn't fall. They just hung there, in a bubble of silent, dead time. Before crumbling into fine, gray dust, not steam. The air itself seemed to congeal, the light bending around a spot of absolute nothingness. The agent took its reading. It catalogued the energy signature, the nature of the reality, and the source of the anomaly. The discordant note was no longer just a note. It was a symphony, a threat to the great silence. The weaver of silence would need to be informed. The hunt was no longer passive observation. It was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Hunter and the Hunted. The victory at Trost was a bloody, intoxicating dawn. For the first time, humanity had not just survived a Titan attack, but had pushed back. They had reclaimed lost territory. The impossible had been made possible, and the source of that miracle was twofold. The boy who could become a Titan, and the boy who could command an army. Eren Yeager was taken into the custody of the Scout Regiment, a valuable, terrifying asset to be studied and, hopefully, controlled. Naruto Uzumaki was given a choice. The military police, their fear now bordering on religious terror, demanded his incarceration. They called him the Golden Demon, a name that was half awe, half execration. But Commander Erwin Smith, his position bolstered by the victory, offered Naruto something else, a uniform. Not the drab brown of a cadet, but the deep green of the scouts. Emblazoned with the wings of freedom. Your power is a political firestorm, Erwin had told him in the quiet aftermath, his arm in a sling from an injury sustained during the battle. The nobles and the cultists fear you more than they fear the titans. They fear you because you represent change, and their power is built on stagnation. The only way to protect you, and to harness your abilities for the good of humanity, is to keep you at the forefront. On the front lines. With us, there was no real choice. The scouts were the only faction that saw him as a person and not just a weapon or a monster. Besides, their goal was his, to go beyond the walls. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. The scouts were planning their 57th expedition, the first major foray into Titan territory since the reclamation of Trost. The official goal was to chart a course to the ruins of Shiganshina, to Eren's basement, where the secrets of the Titans were supposedly hidden. But Naruto knew better. He sat in on Erwin's strategy meetings, a silent participant whose presence alone changed every calculation. He listened as Erwin, Levi, and Zoe debated routes and formations. And he watched Erwin's eyes. He saw the cold, calculating brilliance there. This expedition wasn't just about reaching a basement. It was a trap. Armin's deductions about the titans who had attacked them, the colossal and the armored, had been chillingly astute. They were intelligent. They were coordinated. They were human. And if there were two, there were likely more, hidden among them. Hidden, perhaps, within the ranks of the 104th. Naruto already had his own suspicions. Reiner, Bertholdt, Annie, the trio that moved with a synchronicity born of long practice, not 3 years of training. He trio whose stories never quite added up. He had shared his observations with Erwin, who had simply nodded, his face giving nothing away, and added them to his own complex mental calculus. This expedition was a hunt. And Naruto was the bait. He stood with the other new recruits, his green cloak whipping in the wind, a strange sight among them. The wings of freedom felt heavy on his back. He wasn't fighting for humanity, not really. He was fighting for his friends. For the determined, angry boy who was now their greatest hope. For the quiet, fiercely loyal girl who was finally starting to look beyond the person she was sworn to protect. For the brilliant, terrified boy who saw the world in patterns others missed. He looked over the new recruits. He saw Jean, his face grim but resolute, old ambitions of a cushy life burned away in the fires of trust. He saw Connie and Sasha, their usual levity replaced by a hard-earned sobriety. And he saw them, Reiner, giving a confident thumbs up to Ren, Bertholdt, sweating more than usual, and Annie, standing apart from everyone, her small frame radiating an aura of absolute isolation. Her eyes met his for a brief second across the crowded courtyard. It was a complicated look, part suspicion, part curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite decipher. A challenge. Move out. Erwin's voice boomed, and the massive gates of Karane's district groaned open. A wave of green cloaks surged forward into the bright, dangerous world beyond the walls. The cheers of the crowd at their backs felt hollow, a funeral dirge masquerading as a celebration. They rode in Erwin's long-range scouting formation, a brilliant, sprawling web of soldiers designed to maximize detection and minimize contact with titans. Naruto rode near the center, in the command squad with Erwin and Levi. It was a position of honor and protection, but he felt like a caged animal. His sage mode, even in its passive state, was a constant thrum of information. He could feel the titans dotted across the landscape, their dull presences like cold spots in the vibrant tapestry of nature. He could feel the nervous, frantic heartbeats of his comrades spread out for miles in every direction. They were 2 hours out when the right flank fired a black smoke signal. An aberrant, then another, and another. The right wing of the formation was collapsing, far faster than it should. They're being targeted, Levi said, his voice flat and bored, as if commenting on the weather. Someone is leading the titans, picking us apart. Erwin's face was a stone mask. Just as we predicted, he raised his flare gun. Fire the signal. All squads, proceed to the forest of giant trees. Execute Plan B. A green flare shot into the sky, and across the plains, the formation broke. Squads changed direction, converging on a single point on the horizon, a forest of gargantuan trees that dwarfed even the walls. It was a chaotic, pre-planned maneuver designed to confuse their unseen enemy. Naruto knew what was happening. This was the first part of the trap. The forest was the cage. As they rode, he felt it. A new presence. It was fast, intelligent, and radiating a controlled, focused rage that was utterly different from the mindless titans. It was coming from the right, tearing through the formation, heading directly for the center. Directly for Eren. It's here, Naruto said, his voice low. Erwin nodded. Levi, you and your squad, take Eren. Get him to the rendezvous point. Do not engage, no matter what. Levi clicked his tongue in annoyance but obeyed, peeling off with his elite squad and Eren. Heading deep into the forest, Naruto reined his horse to a stop, turning to face the direction of the coming threat. What are my orders, Commander? Erwin looked at him, his one good eye holding an unnerving level of trust. Your orders are to confirm the enemy's identity. And to survive, Hange and I will spring the trap. You are our insurance. Naruto gave a sharp nod. Got it. He dismounted, handing his reins to a nearby soldier. Don't wait for me. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, drawing on the natural energy. The orange pigmentation flowed around his eyes. The world snapped into sharp, vibrant focus. He could feel the thundering footsteps, the crushing of trees, the terrified screams of his comrades. He could feel the specific chakra signature of the attacker. It was familiar, frighteningly familiar. Annie. The name was a bitter confirmation in his mind. The cold girl from the mess hall, the philosopher of nihilism, the warrior with the sad eyes. It was her. He didn't wait. He burst forward, his legs pumping, a golden yellow blur against the dark green of the forest floor. He was faster than any horse, a streak of pure energy. He didn't follow the trails. He ran up the trunks of the colossal trees, leaping from one to the next, 100 feet in the air, his movements silent and fluid. He saw her then, the female titan. She was a thing of deadly grace, her blonde hair flowing, her form lean and athletic. She moved with a purpose that was terrifying, swatting aside veteran scouts like flies. She wasn't just killing, she was checking. She would incapacitate a soldier, peer under their hood, and, upon seeing it wasn't Eren, would crush them without a second thought, her face a mask of detached frustration. Naruto's heart clenched. He recognized the bodies. Luke, the quiet man from Hange's squad. The hot-headed Dita Ness from the supply team. People he had shared meals with. People he had trained with. Rage, cold and pure, washed through him. But he kept it leashed. Erwin's orders were clear. Confirm and survive. Killing her now would be easy. A single Recentrican and she would be a cloud of dissolving steam. But that wouldn't solve anything. It wouldn't get them the answers they needed. And a deeper, more personal part of him, the part that remembered their debates in the mess hall, didn't want to kill her. He wanted to understand why. He shadowed her from the treetops, a silent, golden ghost. He watched as she tore through the scouts, a force of nature. He watched her engage Armin, and saw her pause, lifting her hand to brush his hood aside. For a split second, her titan face held a flicker of recognition, of something. And she let him live. She has a heart, Naruto thought. It's buried deep, but it's there. He was getting closer to the center of the forest, closer to Erwin's trap. And closer to where Levi was hiding Eren. Naruto had to intervene, not to stop her, to guide her. He dropped from the trees, landing silently on the forest floor directly in her path. The female titan skidded to a halt, her massive blue eyes widening in what looked like shock. She stared down at the small, golden-clad figure standing before her. She had been tracking the main force, but this was an anomaly. Naruto didn't assume a fighting stance. He just stood there, his arms loose at his sides, his sage mode eyes locked onto hers. Annie, he said. His voice was calm, but it carried through the forest, amplified by his chakra. The titan flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible reaction, but he saw it. The confirmation was absolute. She didn't speak. She reacted. Her legs swung in a devastating roundhouse kick, aimed to smear him into a red paste against the nearest tree. The kick was impossibly fast, carrying with it the force of a battering ram. Naruto didn't move. At the last possible fraction of a second, a massive, spectral arm of golden chakra erupted from his body, catching the titan's leg. It was Kurama's power, a single, gigantic limb. The impact created a shockwave that flattened the surrounding ferns, but the chakra arm held firm. The female titan's eyes widened further. She tried to pull her leg back, but the chakra held her fast. I'm not going to fight you, Annie, Naruto said, his voice still calm, but with an undercurrent of sorrow. But I'm not going to let you go any further. She responded with a furious roar, her other hand hardening into a crystalline shell, and she swung it down at him. The chakra arm vanished, and Naruto was gone. He had moved with a burst of speed that was nearly instantaneous. Reappearing on her outstretched arm, running up it like a squirrel. Why are you doing this? He asked as he ran, his voice easily keeping pace with her movements. What did they promise you? A medal, a quiet life. Was it worth all this? He gestured to the forest around them, to the unseen bodies of their comrades. She tried to grab him, but it was like trying to catch smoke. He was too fast, too agile. He leapt from her arm to her shoulder, perching there like a parrot. Remember what we talked about, he said, his voice now right next to her ear. About Ho. It's easier to say the world is garbage than it is to clean it up. Is this you cleaning? Or are you just making a bigger mess? His words were like scalpels. He wasn't insulting her. He wasn't threatening her. He was talking to her, forcing her to confront the philosophy she had so coldly espoused. With a scream of pure frustration, she hardened the skin on her shoulder, trying to impale him on a spike of crystal. But he was already gone, leaping into the air and landing on a tree branch 100 feet away. He had her attention. She was no longer focused on finding Eren. She was focused entirely on him, on silencing the voice that was peeling back her layers of conditioning. He had successfully diverted her. Now, for part 2. He turned and ran, a deliberate, calculated retreat. He wasn't moving at his full speed. Just fast enough to make her chase him. Just fast enough to lead her directly into the heart of Erwin's trap. She followed, her thunderous footsteps shaking the forest. It was a high-speed chase through the giant trees, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Naruto weaved through the trunks, leapt over ravines, and slid under fallen logs, always staying just out of her reach. Her furious grabs and kicks missing by inches. He could feel the trap ahead. Hange's squad, dozens of them, hidden in the trees, armed with hundreds of harpoons and steel cables. He burst into the designated clearing and didn't stop. He ran straight up the trunk of the central, largest tree, and vanished into its high branches. The female titan stormed into the clearing right behind him, her eyes scanning wildly. She had lost him. Now, Erwin's voice roared from the canopy. The air filled with the sound of hissing gas and firing mechanisms. 100 harpoons shot out from the surrounding trees, each trailing a thick steel cable. They slammed into the female titan's body, piercing her flesh, anchoring her to the massive trees. She roared in pain and surprise, trying to move, but the cables held her fast. In seconds, she was crucified, a prisoner of steel and wood. The trap had been sprung. Scouts rappelled from the trees, surrounding her. Hange Zoe, her eyes alight with a terrifying, scientific glee, was already preparing the extraction equipment. Don't kill it. We must get the person inside out alive. Naruto watched from his perch, his sage mode fading. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Pity, perhaps. He had led her here. He had used her anger, her frustration, against her. It was a necessary victory, but it felt dirty. But Annie was far from defeated. Trapped and facing exposure, she did the one thing they didn't expect. She let out a titan scream, a high-pitched, piercing shriek that echoed for miles. What is she doing? Levi asked, landing on a branch near Naruto. Calling for help, Naruto said grimly, his sage senses flaring. From every direction, the dull, stupid presences of the titans were changing course. They were stampeding toward the clearing, drawn by her cry. A mindless army, summoned to devour their own kind to protect a secret. They're going to eat her. Hange screamed in horrified realization. The titans swarmed the clearing. The scouts tried to fight them off. But it was a flood. They poured over the female titan, a writhing mass of snapping jaws and grasping hands. In the bloody chaos, the scouts were forced to retreat. When the feeding frenzy was over, there was nothing left but a steaming, half-dissolved skeleton of the female titan. There was no body inside. She had used the chaos to escape, cutting her way out of Enape with a piece of her own hardened crystal and using her ODM gear to flee. The plan had failed. Dozens of scouts were dead, and their target had escaped. The retreat was sounded, a somber, mournful bugle call. The 57th expedition was a catastrophic failure. The ride back was a grim, silent affair. The surviving scouts were haunted by the faces of their fallen comrades. Naruto rode with Levi's squad. The silence thicker than any forest. He felt the weight of the failure personally. He had her. He had talked to her. He could have ended it. But he had followed orders. As they neared the safety of the walls, 2 figures in green cloaks caught up with them. It was Reiner and Bertholdt. Did you see it? Reiner asked, his face pale. The female titan. She was torn apart. Do you know who it was? Naruto looked at him, then at Bertholdt, who was avoiding his gaze. The act was good, but not good enough. No, Naruto said, his voice flat. But I have a pretty good idea. The mission was a failure. But it had yielded one crucial piece of information. Armin, recalling how the female Titan had spared him and had seemed to know Eren's nickname, the suicidal bastard, had pieced it together. He voiced his suspicion to Naruto and Erwin on their return. The female Titan was a member of the 104th. The female Titan was Annie Lenhart. The second trap was laid not in a forest, but in the heart of the Stohes district. Within Walsina, the plan was simple and desperate. Armin would convince Annie to help them smuggle Eren to safety, leading her into a deep underground tunnel where she couldn't transform. If she refused, it was proof. Naruto was against it. It was too risky, too public. If she transforms in the middle of the city, hundreds will die, he argued in the secret meeting with Erwin, Levi, and Hange. It's a risk we have to take, Erwin said, his face grim. We have to flush her out. And we need you there. If she does transform, you are the only one who can stop her. Naruto hated it. He hated being the cleanup crew, the ultimate weapon held in reserve. But he agreed. He watched from a rooftop as the scene played out below. He saw Armin approach Annie, his face a mask of false friendship. He saw Mikasa, cloaked and hooded, watching from an alley, her hand on her sword. He saw the tension in Annie's shoulders as she realized she was being cornered. Armin, Annie said, her voice soft but chilling. When did you start looking at me with those eyes? She refused to enter the tunnel. The trap was sprung. The soldiers hidden in the surrounding buildings emerged. Annie, it's over. Surrender. Armin pleaded. Annie laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the rooftops, and for a second, Naruto was sure she was looking right at him. So, it comes to this. She raised her hand to her mouth, a ring with a hidden blade glinting on her finger. My gamble is just beginning. Mikasa moved, a flash of steel, to cut her down before she could transform. But she was too slow. Annie bit down. A bolt of yellow lightning erupted from the sky, slamming into the street. The explosion threw everyone back. In the center of the crater, the female Titan rose. Bigger and more furious than ever. The city erupted into screams. It was Trost all over again, but this time, the monster was one of their own. The female Titan began to run, her goal to climb the wall and escape. She crushed buildings and people under her feet, a trail of destruction in her wake. Hange and her squads engaged, firing harpoons, but she was too fast, too strong. Eren, after a moment of horrified hesitation, transformed, and the two titans began a brutal, city-shattering brawl. Naruto watched for only a moment. He saw the destruction. He saw the bodies. And his patience finally, utterly, snapped. Enough of this, he snarled. He leapt from the rooftop, a golden missile of pure rage. He didn't bother with a Rasengan. He didn't bother with clones. This was going to be personal. He landed on the female Titan's back as she was grappling with Eren's attack Titan. She felt him land and tried to swat him off, but he was already moving. He ran up her spine. His feet magnetized to her skin with chakra. He reached the nape of her neck. He wasn't going to kill her. He was going to end this. He began to speak, his voice a low, intense rumble that she could feel through her entire body. A vibration that reached the girl inside. Is this what you wanted, Annie? He roared over the chaos. Look around you. Look at the bodies. Look at the children crying. Is this the survival you were talking about? Is this what your father wanted for you? She flinched violently at the mention of her father, a secret she had told no one. Armin must have told him. The betrayal fueled her rage. She hardened the skin on her nape, trying to throw him off. You fight for a world that sent a child to do its dirty work. He continued, his voice rising, each word a hammer blow against her conditioning. You're not a soldier. You're a sacrifice. They don't care if you live or die, as long as you get the job done. Is that a life worth living? Is that a mission worth dying for? He was systematically dismantling her entire world. He wasn't just fighting her body. He was attacking her soul, her ideology, her very reason for being. Eren's Titan, in a frenzy, managed to tackle her, sending them both crashing through a church. She was pinned, her leg trapped under Eren's Titan body. She tried to get up, but she was stuck. The scouts were closing in. Levi was in the air, his blades ready. It was over. In her desperation, she started to harden her entire body in a shell of impenetrable crystal. It was her final trump card, a self-inflicted prison to protect her secrets. Naruto saw it happening. The crystal was spreading from her limbs, covering her skin in a translucent, diamond-hard shell. "No, you don't," he yelled. "You're not getting away. Not like this." He jumped from her nape, landing in front of her face. He held up his hand, gathering the last of his sage energy. The air screeched as he formed a Rasengan, but this one was different. It was smaller, more compressed, and it glowed with a brilliant white light, infused with natural energy. Sage art. Rasengan. He slammed it not against her skin, but against the crystal that was forming over her face. The crystal, which could supposedly withstand any force, met the grinding, elemental power of the sage art. Cracks spider webbed across its surface. With a sound like a shattering glacier, the crystal broke. Naruto's fist, wrapped in the power of the Rasengan, stopped a single, terrifying inch from her face. The female titan's eyes, wide with terror, stared at him. She was defeated. Her trump card was broken. Her mission was a failure. Before her stood an executioner, holding the power to erase her from existence. But he didn't strike. The Rasengan dissipated. He stood there, his fist still raised, his chest heaving. His sage mode eyes, filled not with rage, but with a profound, aching sadness, looked directly at the girl within the monster. He lowered his fist, and then he did something that no one, least of all her, could have ever predicted. He offered his hand. It was an open palm, not a fist. An invitation, not a threat. "It's over, Annie," he said, his voice now quiet, gentle. "You don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to be their monster." He took a breath. "Come on, let me help you." Annie stared at his outstretched hand. She looked at his face, at the genuine plea in his eyes. He wasn't a soldier accepting a surrender. He was a person, offering a lifeline. All her life, she had been a tool. For her father, for Marley, a weapon to be aimed. No one had ever offered her a choice. No one had ever offered her grace. In that moment, faced with an executioner who had chosen to be a savior, her iron will, her years of brutal training, her cold, nihilistic philosophy, it all crumbled into dust. Slowly, her titan form began to dissolve in a massive cloud of steam. The giantess melted away, revealing the small, shaking form of the girl inside. Tears, hot and unfamiliar, streamed down her face. The first she had shed in a decade. She looked at his outstretched hand. It was a path to a future she had never believed was possible. It was an escape. Hesitantly, her own hand shaking, Annie Lenhart reached out and took it. It was a surrender, not to the scouts, not to humanity, but to the impossible hope that this strange, golden-eyed boy represented. From a nearby rooftop, Mikasa watched, her blade still in her hands. She saw the offered hand. She saw Annie take it. She saw the titan dissolve, leaving a weeping girl. She saw Naruto gently help her to her feet. A storm of emotions warred within her. Jealousy, hot and sharp, suspicion, ingrained and cold, and a deep, grudging respect for the sheer, unbelievable force of Naruto's conviction. He hadn't just defeated an enemy. He had saved a soul. And in doing so, he had once again shattered her understanding of the world. As Naruto stood with Annie's hand in his, a strange, cold sensation prickled the back of his neck. His sage mode, drained but not gone, picked up a flicker of something deeply wrong. Miles outside the walls, in the forest of giant trees, the very air was growing still. A section of the forest, a perfect circle 100 meters wide, was simply fading. The trees weren't dying. They were turning to gray, petrified statues. The animals within it crumbled to silent dust. The very life force of the area was being erased. A new presence had arrived. It was not a scout. It was not a titan. It was a silenced inquisitor, a more powerful agent of the void, drawn by the massive flare of both Naruto's and Annie's power. It was no longer just observing. It had a lock on his energy signature. The real hunt had just begun. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Uprising and the New Family. Returning with Annie Lenhart, alive and cooperating, did not bring peace. It brought the storm. The city of Stohess was a wreck, its citizens in shock, and the delicate political balance within Walsina was shattered. Naruto had not just captured the female titan, he had brought home a living, breathing truth that the powers that be would do anything to bury. Annie was taken to a deep, subterranean cell. A place of damp stone and echoing silence. But she was not treated as a prisoner of war. Erwin, in a move of stunning political audacity, declared her a protected witness, under the sole jurisdiction of the Scout Regiment. It was a flimsy legal shield, but it was a shield nonetheless. The reaction from the capital was swift and furious. The royal government, a shadowy council of Bawee, GGED nobles who had long been puppets of a hidden king, and the first interior squad of the military police, their true enforcers, were incandescent with rage. They didn't see a source of priceless intelligence. They saw a loose end. They saw a monster who had fraternized with their own golden demon. An order came down from the highest authority. Annie Lenhart was to be handed over to the IOR police for interrogation and immediate execution. Naruto Uzumaki was to be stripped of his rank and taken into custody for treasonous conduct and consorting with the enemy. The order was delivered to the Scout headquarters by a sneering Nile Dok himself, flanked by a dozen of his most ruthless interior police officers. They stood in the main courtyard, a tense standoff against Levi and a handful of his squad. "This is a direct decree from the Royal Council," Erwin, Nile said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be. Give us the girl and the demon." Erwin Smith stood before them, his face as calm and unreadable as ever. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, Commander. Miss Lenhart is providing intelligence vital to the survival of humanity. Her intelligence is irrelevant." A nobleman accompanying Nile shrieked, his face puce. "Her existence threatens the peace. And that thing," he spat, gesturing vaguely in the direction of Naruto's quarters, "is a blasphemy against the walls." The argument was circular, a clash of immovable ideologies. But as they postured and threatened, a new voice cut through the tension. "Are you talking about me?" Naruto walked out of the barracks and into the courtyard. He wasn't wearing his scout uniform. He was back in his familiar orange and black jacket, his hands shoved casually in his pockets. He looked relaxed, almost bored. But his eyes were like chips of blue ice. "Uzumaki," Nile snarled. "You are under arrest." "Am I?" Naruto said, stopping a few feet from the tense line of soldiers. He glanced at the arrest warrant in Nile's hand. "That's a nice piece of paper. Did you draw the little titan on it yourself?" A few of the younger scouts choked back a laugh. Levi's lips twitched. "Show some respect, you monster." The nobleman screeched. "You are in the presence of your betters." Naruto's gaze shifted to the nobleman. The playful sarcasm vanished, replaced by a cold, heavy pressure that made the air feel thick. "My betters. You, who hide in the capital while men and women die to protect your bloated lifestyles. You, who would rather see humanity go extinct than have your comfortable world disturbed. You are not my betters. You are parasites, and you are in my way." He took a step forward. The interior police tensed, their hands flying to their ODM gear triggers. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Naruto said softly. He didn't move. He didn't make a seal. He just flared his chakra. Not an attack, just a release. A wave of pure, golden power, visible as a shimmering heat haze, washed over the courtyard. It wasn't violent. It was just heavy. It felt like the air had turned to lead. The horses whinnied and reared in their stables. The interior police officers staggered, their knees buckling. Nile Dok, to his credit, remained standing, but he was pale, sweat beading on his brow. The nobleman collapsed to his knees, gasping as if he were drowning. "The next time you call me a demon," Naruto said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that carried to every corner of the courtyard, "I might just show you what one looks like." He let the pressure subside. The air returned to normal. He walked past the trembling soldiers, stopping directly in front of Erwin. "This is a waste of time," Naruto said, his voice back to normal. "They're not going to listen to reason. They don't want answers. They want control. So, let's take it from them." Erwin looked at him, a glint of something fierce and triumphant in his eye. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The catalyst. "You're proposing a coup d'état." "I'm proposing we stop asking for permission from cowards to save the world," Naruto corrected. "You've got the plan. Pixis and Zackley are on board. You have the people's trust, what little of it there is. And you have me. It's time to stop playing defense." It was a declaration of war. Not against the Titans, but against the Fulan-rotted heart of their own government. Nile and his men, having recovered, could only stare in horrified disbelief. They had come to arrest a soldier. They had just witnessed the first act of a revolution. They retreated, not with threats, but with the panicked haste of men who had just seen the future, and it terrified them. The days that followed were a blur of clandestine activity. The coup, a long-term, desperate contingency for Erwin, was accelerated into a full-scale, immediate operation. With Annie's intel, everything changed. She wasn't just a Titan, she was a treasure trove of secrets. Naruto became a frequent visitor to her subterranean cell. He didn't come as an interrogator. He came as a friend. He brought her proper food from the mess hall, not the slop they gave prisoners. He brought her books. He sat with her, not questioning, but just talking. The first few visits were silent. She would sit on her cot, her back to him, a wall of cold indifference. He would sit on the floor, leaning against the opposite wall, and talk. He told her about his own world, about Konoha, about his dream of becoming Hokage, a leader who protected everyone. He told her about his own lonely childhood, about being ostracized for the monster sealed inside him. They called me a demon, too, he said one afternoon, his voice echoing in the quiet cell. They were afraid of me. They whispered behind my back. For a long time, I hated them for it. I thought if they wanted a monster, I'd be the biggest, baddest monster they'd ever seen. She shifted slightly, a sign that she was listening. But then I realized, hating them just mad. Me more like the monster they thought I was. It was a trap. The only way to win was to be better than them. To protect the very people who scorned me. To prove them wrong. He looked at her silent form. You don't have to be what Marley made you. You don't have to be what your father trained you to be. You can choose to be someone else. On his fifth visit, she finally spoke. Her voice was raspy, unused. Why? She asked, not turning around. Why are you doing this? After what I did. Because I know what it's like to feel like you're alone in the world, with a burden you didn't ask for, he said simply. And because when I look at you, I don't see the female Titan. I see a girl who's tired of fighting a war that isn't hers. That broke the dam. She began to talk, hesitantly at first, then in a flood. She told him everything. About her childhood in the Librio internment zone. About her father, his desperate obsession with making her a warrior to gain honorary Marleyan status. About the brutal training, the pressure, the indoctrination. About Reiner and Bertholdt. About the mission to retrieve the founding Titan. She spoke with a detached, clinical tone, but Naruto could hear the lifetime of pain buried beneath the words. He didn't judge her. He just listened. And when she was done, he made her a promise. I'm going to change this world, Annie, he said, his voice filled with an unwavering conviction. I'm going to create a place where you don't have to be a soldier to survive. A place where you can just live. I promise. For the first time, she turned and looked at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed. But for the first time since he'd met her, they weren't cold. They were just lost. And in them, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to sprout. Her information was the key. She told them about the Reese family, the true royal line, and the interior police's obsession with a girl named Krista Lenz. It was the final piece of Erwin's puzzle. The coup was no longer about seizing power. It was about restoring the rightful heir. Naruto became the scalpel of the revolution. He didn't use overwhelming force. He used precision and psychological warfare. When the interior police, led by the ruthless Kenny Ackerman, moved to capture Eren and Krista, Naruto was there. He sent a single shadow clone, disguised as a merchant, to intercept their carriage. The clone didn't fight them. It simply created 1,000 more clones that flooded the street, forming a dense, impassable crowd, shouting revolutionary slogans and waving Scout Regiment flags. The diversion allowed Levi and his squad to swoop in and rescue Eren and Krista, vanishing before Kenny's squad could even figure out what was happening. He became the face of the uprising. His clones appeared all over the capital, not fighting, but distributing pamphlets detailing the royal government's corruption and their hoarding of resources while the people starved. They were ghosts, appearing and disappearing in puffs of smoke, their message spreading faster than any army could march. The people, who already saw him as the hero of Trost, began to see him as something more, a liberator. The Golden Demon became the Golden Guardian once more. The climax came in the giant subterranean cavern beneath the Reese Chapel. Rod Reese, the last of the false royal line, had captured Eren and his daughter, Historia, the girl formerly known as Krista. His plan was to have Historia eat Eren and reclaim the founding titan for his bloodline. Naruto arrived not with an army, but with Mikasa and a small squad of scouts. This squad was busy holding off Kenny's forces above ground. "This ends now, Reese," Naruto shouted, his voice echoing in the crystalline cavern. Rod Reese, a sniveling, desperate man, laughed maniacally. "You are too late. My daughter will become a god. The true ruler of the walls." He pushed Historia toward the bound Eren. But Historia, her mind cleared by a conversation with Eren and the memory of her friend Ymir, refused. She threw her father to the ground, shattering the syringe of Titan fluid. "I will not be a slave to our family's sins," she declared. In his desperation, Rod Reese did the unthinkable. He licked the spilled Titan fluid from the floor. The cavern was filled with a blinding light as he transformed. But he had taken it wrong. His transformation was a grotesque failure. He became a titan larger than the colossal, 120-meter monstrosity of dragging flesh and exposed bone, too large to even stand, crawling on its belly like a monstrous slug. It ignored them, its instincts driving it toward the most populated area, the Orvid district. "We have to stop it," a scout yelled. "How? It's massive." Naruto looked at the crawling horror, then at the terrified but resolute face of Historia. He made a decision. "Mikasa, get everyone out of here. I'll handle this." "Naruto, no, you can't fight that thing alone," Mikasa protested, her hand flying to her sword hilt. The thought of him facing that monster alone was unbearable. He gave her a confident, reassuring grin, the one that always made her heart skip a beat. "Who said anything about fighting?" He turned to face the monster. He entered Sage mode, the orange markings flaring around his eyes. He created a single clone. He and the clone began to build up a massive amount of chakra. The cavern filled with the sound of 1,000 shrieking birds. "Chidori," Mikasa whispered in shock. It was a technique she had seen him practice, but never on this scale. It wasn't a Chidori. It was bigger. He was molding the lightning-natured chakra into a massive, spear-like shape. He looked at Historia. "You're the queen now. You'd better be ready for it." Then he launched himself at the titan. He didn't attack its nape. He ran along its massive back, the lightning spear in his hand, and drove it deep into the titan's central nervous system. The massive jolt of electricity didn't kill it. It paralyzed it. The colossal monster froze, its body spasming uncontrollably. It was enough. When the army, led by Erwin, confronted the monster at the walls of Orvid, it was already immobile, an easy target for a coordinated cannon barrage. Historia herself delivered the killing blow, earning her the title of the cattle-slaying goddess, and cementing her status as the true hero and queen in the eyes of the people. The coup was a resounding success. Historia was crowned queen. The old government was dissolved. The corrupt nobles were arrested. And one of Queen Historia's first royal decrees was a full and unconditional pardon for Annie Lenhart, who was released from her cell and placed under the permanent guardianship of Naruto Uzumaki. The war for the walls was over. For the first time in a long time, there was a fragile peace. Their new home was a small, requisitioned manor house on the outskirts of Trost, a gift from the queen. It was a quiet place with a small garden and a sturdy stone wall. It was meant to be a home for a hero. But it felt more like a cage. The first dinner was an exercise in excruciating awkwardness. Naruto sat at the head of the table. To his right was Mikasa, quiet and watchful, her loyalty to him now as fierce and unwavering as it had once been to Eren. To his left was Annie, free for the first time in years, but looking more lost and uncertain than she ever had in her cell. She picked at her food, her eyes downcast, a ghost at the feast. The silence was deafening. Naruto sighed and put down his fork. "Okay, this is ridiculous." Both girls looked up, startled. "We're going to be living together," he said, looking from one to the other. "We can't just sit here in silence for the rest of our lives. So, let's talk." "What is there to talk about?" Annie mumbled, her first words of the evening. "I don't know," Naruto admitted. "The weather, the food, The fact that you two have been glaring at each other like you're about to start a deathmatch over the last piece of bread. Mikasa stiffened. I was not glaring. Yes, you were, Annie said, a spark of her old fire returning. You've been staring at me like I'm a titan who's about to eat your boyfriend. He's not my boyfriend, Mikasa retorted, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. And I don't trust you. I don't blame you, Annie said, her voice softening as she looked down at her plate. I wouldn't trust me either. The honesty of her statement disarmed Mikasa. The anger in her posture deflated, replaced by confusion. Naruto saw his opening. Look, I get it. This is weird. Mikasa, I know you say. Eater is the enemy who killed our comrades. And Annie, you probably see Mikasa as just another soldier from the island of devils. And you both probably see me as some kind of alien who fell out of the sky. He wasn't wrong. But we're here now, he continued, his voice earnest. The three of us, we've all been soldiers. We've all lost people. We've all been forced to do things we regret. Maybe that's our common ground. He looked at Mikasa. I trust her, Mikasa. I'm asking you to try. Then he looked at Annie. And I trust you, Annie. I'm asking you to let us. He stood up and began to clear the plates. For what it's worth, this is the first time in 5 years I've had something that feels a little bit like a home. I don't want to mess that up. And I can't do it alone. He left them there, taking the dishes to the kitchen. Mikasa and Annie sat in silence for a long moment. It was Annie who spoke first, her voice barely a whisper. He really believes it, doesn't he? She said. All that stuff he says. About making the world better. He really thinks he can. Mikasa watched Naruto through the kitchen doorway as he started washing the dishes, humming a strange, off-key tune. She saw not the golden demon, not the hero of Trost, but just a boy, trying to build a life out of the wreckage of 3. Yes, Mikasa replied, her voice soft. He does. And the terrifying part is, I think he might be right. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship. But it was a beginning. A fragile, tentative truce, forged in the quiet of a new home, under the shared roof provided by the one person who saw them not as an Ackerman and a warrior, but as Mikasa and Annie. The two strongest women in the walls, united by the shared, impossible reality of their love for the sun that had fallen from the sky. Later that night, as the house fell silent, Naruto sat in the garden, meditating. He needed to recover his energy, to center himself after the chaos of the coup. He delved deep into his own consciousness, sifting through his chakra. Reaching for the calm of sage mode. As he sank into the quiet place within himself, his mind brushed against something else. It was cold. It was alien. It was the void from his nightmares. But this time, it wasn't a passive presence. It was active. It was searching. It was hunting. Anomaly. Found. A flash of imagery, not his own, burned through his mind. He saw a starless, silent universe. He saw galaxies not being born, but being unmade, erased into a perfect, uniform nothingness. He saw a being, or a concept, at the center of it all, the weaver of silence, a god of entropy. Its only purpose to smooth out the messy, chaotic wrinkles of existence. And he saw its agent, the silenced inquisitor, a distorted humanoid shape of pure anti-energy, turning its faceless head toward a tiny, bright spark in the endless dark. A spark that was him. The discordant song must end. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He was back in the garden, the scent of night blooming jasmine in the air. But he was shivering, a deep, soul-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was no longer just having nightmares. He had made contact. Something was hunting him, not for his power, not for revenge, but for the simple fact that he existed. And it was getting closer. The war with the Titans was just a prelude. The real battle was for reality itself. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Truth and Consequences. The peace was a fragile, shallow breath before the next plunge. In the months following the uprising, Parody Island was transformed. Under Queen Historia's rule, with Erwin's strategic mind, Hange's scientific zeal, and Naruto's impossible power, a quiet industrial revolution began. The secrets of the Reese family provided new avenues of research, and Naruto's clones became the ultimate labor force, building new infrastructure, reinforcing walls, and manufacturing advanced weaponry at a speed that defied belief. But the truth of the outside world, gleaned from Annie's confessions, hung over them like a guillotine. They were an island of so-called devils, hated by a world that vastly outnumbered and outgunned them. The mission to retake Wal Mari, and reach Grisha Yeager's basement was no longer just about hope, it was a desperate necessity. They needed to know what Eren's father had learned. They needed to understand the full scope of the war they were in. The expedition to Shiganshina was unlike any before it. It wasn't a small scouting party, it was an army. The entire scout regiment, nearly 300 strong, rode out at dusk, a silent, determined river of green cloaks flowing through the reclaimed lands of Wal Maria. They rode through the night, a strategy proposed by Naruto to avoid Titan contact, their way lit by the moon and the faint golden glow that he and his clones emanated to mark the path. At the vanguard rode a new kind of Holy Trinity, a unit that had become both a legend and a symbol of this new era. Naruto was at the center, a beacon of calm, unwavering power. To his right, Mikasa, her face set with grim focus, her movements a symphony of deadly precision, her eyes constantly scanning, her role as protect. Tor now extended to the entire formation. To his left rode Annie, a silent, cloaked figure on a dark horse. She had been offered a scout uniform, but had quietly refused. She was not one of them, not yet. But she was with them. Her knowledge of Marleyan military tactics and warrior training had been instrumental in planning the operation. She was their advisor, their secret weapon, and her presence was a constant, tense reminder of what was at stake. The bond between the three of them had solidified in the quiet months of peace. The awkward dinners had given way to sparring sessions in the Gar Den, breathtaking displays of power and skill that would have leveled a city block if they weren't holding back. Naruto would act as a moving fulcrum, forcing Mikasa's perfect offense to clash with Annie's impenetrable defense. They learned each other's rhythms, anticipated each other's moves, and forged a nonverbal battlefield synergy that was both beautiful and terrifying to behold. The jealousy and suspicion had not vanished, but it had been subsumed by a deep, shared respect and a fierce, unspoken protectiveness of the strange, unconventional family they had built. They reached Shiganshina at dawn. The ruined city was silent, a ghost town haunted by the memories of that terrible day. The plan, devised by Armin, was simple and elegant. Most of the scouts would ride through the city as bait, drawing out any hidden enemies, while Eren, in secret, would circle around and use his hardened Titan form to seal the outer gate, trapping their foes inside. Naruto stood with Erwin and Levi on the top of the wall, watching the operation begin. "Your senses?" Erwin asked, his eyes scanning the silent rooftops. Naruto was already in sage mode. He had scattered a dozen sensory-type clones across the district, creating a perfect three-dimensional map of the city in his mind. "It's quiet. Too quiet. I can feel 4 distinct signatures. Strong ones, hidden inside the wall itself." He pointed. "There, and one right below us." As he spoke, a soldier who had been inspecting the wall near them suddenly cried out. A blade had erupted from the stone, impaling him. From a hidden compartment, Reiner Braun emerged, his face a mask of grim resolve. "He's here," a scout yelled. Before Reiner could even draw a breath, Levi was on him, a blur of motion, his blades flashing. He drove one sword straight through Reiner's neck and another through his chest. It should have been a killing blow. Reiner just grunted, a look of grim annoyance on his face. "So, you found me." A bolt of yellow lightning erupted from his body. The explosion sent Levi and Erwin flying. Naruto, already moving, grabbed them both, pulling them from the blast and landing safely 100 yards down the wall. Across the district, another bolt of lightning struck. Bertholdt had transformed. The colossal titan, the monster that had started it all, materialized in a cloud of superheated steam, its skeletal form towering over the city. But the real threat appeared in the distance. A new titan, a bizarre, quadrupedal one with a long, equine face and a harness on its back, scrambled over the far wall. And on its back was a hulking, simian-like titan with long arms and a coat of dark fur. The beast titan. It picked up a boulder, crushed it in its hand, and then, with a horrifying, baseball-like pitch, hurled the shrapnel at the scouts stationed at the gate. The volley of rocks was like a shotgun blast, tearing through the contingent, shredding men and horses alike. The trap had been sprung, but it was on them. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and outpositioned. Erwin, his face bleeding from the explosion, began shouting orders, a desperate plan to take down the Beast Titan. Levi was tasked with the impossible mission. But Naruto shook his head. No, he said, his voice cutting through the commanders. Levi, your target is Reiner. Keep the armored titan busy. Erwin, get back. Your mind is more valuable than your sword arm. Hange, take your squad and support Levi. And what about the big ones, Naruto? Hange yelled, her goggles askew. The walking mountain and the hairy bastard. Yuto looked from the steaming colossal titan to the distant, calculating beast titan. He took a deep breath. I'll handle them. He didn't wait for an argument. He turned to Mikasa and Annie, who had joined him on the wall. You two, with me. We're ending this, all of it. Right now. The look on his face was one they had never seen before. It was not the righteous anger from Trost, nor the sad determination from Stohess. This was the cold, absolute focus of a god of war. Annie, he commanded, you know their tactics. The colossal is slow, but its steam is a weapon. The beast titan is the commander. He's the real target. What's his weakness? Zeke, the beast titan, is arrogant, Annie said, her voice sharp and clinical as she slipped back into the mindset of a warrior. He fights from a distance. He's not used to close quarters combat. If you can get to him, he's vulnerable. But getting to him is the problem. His pitching arm is lethally accurate. Got it. Naruto turned to Mikasa. Your job is interference. Keep the colossal's attention. It's too slow to catch you, but don't get caught in the steam. Just be a nuisance. Can you do it? Mikasa gave a sharp, determined nod, her hands already gripping her thunder spear triggers. Yes. Good. Naruto looked at Annie. You and I are going after Zeke. Annie's eyes widened. Just the two of us. He'll see us coming a mile away. Naruto grinned, a flash of his old, confident self. Who said anything about him seeing us? He created 1,000 shadow clones. They poured over the wall and into the city, a tidal wave of orange. But they didn't engage. They scattered, creating chaos, drawing the attention of the armored titan, and providing 100 false targets. Then, Naruto grabbed Annie and Mikasa, pulling them close. He placed a hand on each of their shoulders. Hold on tight. He vanished. They reappeared a mile away, on a rooftop on the far side of the district, in a dizzying flicker of golden light. It was the body flicker technique, refined to a point of instantaneous teleportation. Mikasa stumbled, her senses reeling. Annie just stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend. He had just teleported them across a city. The list of his impossible abilities kept growing. Mikasa, go, he ordered. She didn't hesitate. She fired her ODM gear and launched herself toward the colossal titan, a small, deadly hornet going after a giant. Naruto turned to Annie. Ready? What's the plan? She asked, drawing her own ODM gear blades, her knuckles white. The plan is you're going to give me some cover. He leapt from the rooftop. But not toward the beast titan. He ran toward a contingent of his own clones who were holding a position near the wall. He grabbed a spare scout cloak and a set of ODM gear. He put on the hood, obscuring his bright hair, and strapped on the gear. You're going to fight like one of them? Annie asked, landing beside him. No, he said, his sage mode eyes glowing from under the hood. I'm going to use their tactics against them. He's looking for a golden-haired demigod. He won't be looking for another bug to squash. He looked at her. Now, I need a distraction. A big one. Something he can't ignore. Annie understood. She looked at him, a flicker of the old, deep-seated fear in her eyes. The fear of becoming that monster again. He saw her hesitation. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. Hey, it's okay. This time, you're not their weapon. You're ours. You're mine. And you're not alone. His words, his touch, the unwavering trust in his eyes, steadied her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and nodded. She raised her hand to her mouth. Another bolt of lightning tore through Shiganshina. The female titan was reborn. But this time was different. She didn't rise with a roar of rage. She rose with a focused, controlled power. She ignored the scouts. She ignored Reiner and Bertholdt. She burst into a sprint, heading directly for the beast titan. Zeke, who had been methodically wiping out the scout cavalry, paused, his hairy face contorting in what looked like pure shock. "Annie, what are you doing?" His voice, deep and human, boomed across the battlefield. Annie didn't answer. She charged. Her fists crystallized. It was the perfect distraction. Her former commander, her mentor, was forced to turn his attention to the traitor in his ranks. He began hurling rocks at her, a furious, desperate attempt to put down his rogue asset. And in the chaos, a single, green-cloaked scout, indistinguishable from the dozens of others Levi was leading in a suicidal charge, broke from the pack. Naruto, using the ODM gear with a clumsy but effective chakra-enhanced propulsion, zipped between the houses, staying low, using the destruction as cover. He was a ghost. Zeke was focused on Annie's frontal assault and the cavalry charge led by Erwin. Levi was focused on Reiner. Bertholdt was focused on Mikasa and Armin's squad. No one was watching the lone, Unrama, cable soldier weaving through the rubble. He reached the base of the house Zeke was perched on. He ditched the ODM gear and ran straight up the wall, his feet sticking to the surface. He was silent. He was invisible. He reached the roof just as Zeke was winding up to throw another boulder at Annie. "Hey, monkey man," Naruto said calmly. Zeke froze. He turned his massive head slowly, his intelligent eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the hooded figure standing nonchalantly behind him. Naruto threw back his hood, revealing his golden hair and glowing sage eyes. "My name's Naruto Uzumaki. You killed my friends. Prepare to die." He didn't give Zeke time to react. He shot forward, a golden streak. He leapt onto the beast titan's arm, ran up it, and delivered a single, brutal, chakra-infused axe kick directly to the nape of its neck. The sound was like a thunderclap. The beast titan's entire neck exploded in a shower of gore and steam. The massive body went limp, and the figure of a bearded, bespectacled man, Zeke Yeager, was ejected from the nape, his limbs severed by the sheer force of the blow. The cart titan, Peak, reacted instantly, abandoning her position to snatch Zeke's mangle torso from the air and retreat with terrifying speed. The commander was gone. The tide of the battle had turned in a single, devastating blow. But it was a victory that came at an almost unbearable cost. On the other side of the wall, Erwin Smith and nearly all the new recruits lay dead, a noble, suicidal sacrifice to buy Levi the opening he needed. And Bertholdt, in a final, desperate act, had unleashed the full power of his transformation, a cataclysmic explosion that had wiped out Hange's squad and half the city, leaving Armin burned to a crisp, on the verge of death. The battle devolved into a desperate, chaotic endgame. Levi, in a grief-fueled rage, had systematically dismantled the armored titan, leaving Reiner a broken, defeated mess. Mikasa had brilliantly taken down the colossal titan with a thunder spear to the nape. But Bertholdt had survived the fall. The choice was laid before Levi, a syringe of titan serum. Two heroes, dying, the brilliant commander Erwin, and the brilliant cadet Armin. Only one could be saved. As they argued, a new threat made itself known. Naruto, standing on the rooftop where he had defeated Zeke, felt it first. A sudden, absolute drop in temperature. A chilling silence that was not the absence of sound, but an active, oppressive presence. The sky above Shiganshina began to darken. Not with clouds, but as if a black cloth were being drawn over the sun. The frantic sounds of the battle faded, replaced by a low, dissonant hum that vibrated in their bones. What is this?" A surviving scout stammered, looking at the unnatural twilight. Naruto's blood ran cold. "It's here." It materialized in the center of the district, coalescing from the shadows. It was not a titan. It was a humanoid figure, 9 feet tall, clad in what looked like hefting plates of solidified nothingness. It had no face, only a smooth, obsidian surface that seemed to absorb the light. This was the silenced Inquisitor. It didn't walk. It glided over the ground, its very presence warping reality. The rubble it passed over didn't just sit there, it turned to fine, gray dust. A wounded soldier, too close to its path, didn't scream. He just faded, his body dissolving into silent particles. The remaining titans, the ones his clones were fighting, stopped. They turned their vapid faces toward the Inquisitor, and then they began to scream. It was a sound of pure, instinctual terror. Then, one by one, They began to crumble, their bodies disintegrating into steam and dust without being touched. The Inquisitor ignored them. It ignored Levi, Mikasa, Eren. Its faceless head turned, and it fixed its attention solely on Naruto. A voice, like grinding glass and dying stars, echoed not in their ears, but directly in their minds. Anomaly. The song of creation is an abomination in this place. It must be silenced. Levi drew his blades. What in the hell is that thing? Stay back, Naruto yelled, his voice tight with a fear he had never known before. You can't fight it. It's not from this world. The Inquisitor raised a hand. The space between it and Naruto warped, contracting like a rubber band. In an instant, it was in front of him, its hand reaching for his face. Naruto reacted on pure instinct. He entered his full Six Paths Sage mode, the golden chakra cloak erupting around him, his skin glowing with divine power. He formed a truth-seeking orb into a black staff and swung it. Not at the Inquisitor, but at the space it occupied. The staff, which could negate any ninjutsu, connected with the Inquisitor's arm. But it didn't destroy it. It just stopped. The black orb unable to nullify the pure entropy. Your power is a flaw in the design. A loud, meaningless noise. We are the correction. The Inquisitor's hand touched his cheek. Pain. It was not physical. It was a spiritual, conceptual agony. He felt his life force, his chakra, being drained, not consumed, but erased. It was like a leak in the very vessel of his soul. A sliver of the Inquisitor's void-like energy. Its anti-existence, seeped into his chakra system, a drop of poison in a river. Naruto roared, a sound of defiance and agony. He unleashed the full, unrestrained power of Kurama, a colossal wave of red and gold chakra that slammed into the Inquisitor. The blast was immense, carving a trench through the center of Shiganshina and out the other side. The Inquisitor was thrown back, its form flickering, distorted. It was not destroyed, but it had been repelled. It had underestimated the sheer, raw life energy of a tailed beast combined with Six Paths power. The anomaly is potent. Data recorded. The Weaver will be pleased. The silence will come for this world. And with that final, chilling thought, the Inquisitor dissolved back into the shadows, the unnatural darkness over the city receding, leaving the bright, afternoon sun shining on a scene of utter devastation. Naruto fell to his knees, his Six Paths mode sputtering and dying. He clutched his chest, a deep, shuddering cough racking his body. He felt cold. There was a patch of numbness in his chakra network, a dead spot where the Inquisitor had touched him, a tiny piece of the void that was now a part of him. He had won. He had driven it off. But he was wounded in a way he couldn't heal. Mikasa and a transformed Annie were at his side in an instant, their faces etched with a terror that went beyond the Titans, beyond Marley. Beyond anything they had ever known. Naruto. What was that thing? Are you okay? Mikasa cried, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch. Annie stood over him, her Titan form a protective shield. Her eyes wide with horrified understanding. She had been trained to believe the founder was a god. But they had just witnessed something that made gods seem small. It's coming, Naruto rasped, looking at the spot where the Inquisitor had vanished. The real enemy, it's coming. In the chaos, Levi had made his choice. He had injected Armin. As they watched, Armin's burned body regenerated, and in a horrific, convulsive transformation, he became a pure Titan. He fell upon the defeated Bertholdt and, in a single, gruesome bite, the power of the colossal Titan was passed on. Their friend was saved, but their world had just become infinitely more complicated. They had retaken Shiganshina. They had won the battle. They had discovered the truth in the basement, the history of Eldia and Marley. The reality of their world. But as they stood in the ruins of the city, the victory felt like ashes in their mouths. The cost had been staggering. And they had learned a new, more terrible truth. The war with Marley was just a schoolyard scuffle. The real war was against the silence at the end of the universe. And it was a war that was coming for them, brought to their doorstep. By the very person who was their only hope of surviving it. Later, as they prepared to return, Mikasa and Annie found Naruto sitting alone on the rebuilt wall, staring out at the sunset. The wound in his chakra was a dull, constant ache. He felt drained, spiritually violated. They didn't speak. They simply sat down on either side of him. Mikasa, in a gesture of profound, quiet support, took his right hand. After a moment of hesitation, Annie took his left. Their warmth seeped into him, a small anchor against the encroaching coldness he felt in his soul. They were a unit now. Not by choice, not by plan, but forged in the fires of a battle against men, monsters, and now, gods. Their individual strengths were formidable, but together, bound by their shared love for the impossible boy between them, they were something more. They looked out at the vast, open world, a world that wanted them dead, and faced it together. The truth had been found, but it had come with a terrible consequence. The silence was coming, and their small, broken family was all that stood in its way. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Dawn of a New World. 3 years. 3 years is an eternity when you are at war. It is an eon when you are reinventing a world. In the 3 years that followed the brutal victory at Shiganshina, Parody Island ceased to be a cage and became a fortress. The secrets of Grisha Yeager's basement, combined with Annie's insider knowledge and Naruto's otherworldly power, had ignited a renaissance. Guided by Hange and an invigorated Armin, who now wielded the strategic mind of a commander and the power of the colossal titan, they leapt forward a century in technology. Naruto's clones, a tireless and infinite workforce, built railways that connected the districts, factories that churned out improved firearms and advanced jet-propelled ODM gear, and a naval fleet that could challenge the might of Marley. The island was no longer on the defensive. It was a nascent world power, bristling with a unique blend of steam-age technology and shinobi magic. At the heart of this new world was a new kind of leadership. Queen Historia was the political heart, the beloved monarch who unified the people. But the true center of power, the pillar upon which their survival rested, was the unconventional family in the manor house at Trost. They had married, not in a grand ceremony, but in a quiet, private moment in their garden. With only Armin and a tearful Historia as witnesses. It was not a union recognized by any law or religion this world knew, but it was a bond sealed by shared battles, shared secrets, and a love that had bloomed in the most impossible of circumstances. Naruto Uzumaki, Mikasa Ackerman, and Annie Lenhart. They were the triumvirate of Parody's might, the Isla-N's beloved leader and ultimate deterrent, its supreme general, and its head of intelligence and diplomacy. The dynamic between Mikasa and Annie had evolved from a tense rivalry into a deep, unspoken understanding. They were two sides of the same coin, both defined by their strength, both remade by their love for the same man. Mikasa, the unbreakable shield, found in Annie a mind as sharp and ruthless as her own blades. Annie, the disillusioned warrior, found in Mikasa a loyalty so absolute it bordered on a law of nature. They were not just co-wives, they were comrades, confidants, and the only two people in existence who understood the weight of loving a man who held the world on his shoulders. But a shadow lingered. The spiritual wound Naruto had suffered from the Inquisitor had never truly healed. It was a cold spot in his soul, a tiny patch of the void that he kept walled off with his own immense chakra. Some nights, he would wake up shivering, the silent, pulling emptiness of his nightmares more vivid than ever. He told no one of the severity of it, but Mikasa and Annie knew. They could feel it in the moments he would go unnervingly still, his eyes focused on something they couldn't see. It was a secret fear they all shared, a ticking clock counting down to a war far greater than the one on their horizon. The inevitable day came. Marley, having lost its most powerful titans and humiliated by the island devils, had rallied the world's armies. A massive allied fleet, 100 warships strong, appeared on the horizon, their goal not conquest but annihilation. The complete and utter eradication of everyone and everything on Parody Island. Naruto stood on the coast, the sea breeze whipping his cloak. Mikasa was on his right, clad in the black, form-fitting uniform of the new military, her thunder spears gleaming. Annie was on his left, her face grim, her hands tucked into the pockets of a long coat. Behind them, the new army of Parody stood ready, armed with semi-automatic rifles and cannons that could fire with terrifying speed and accuracy. Eren, grim and silent, stood with Armin, prepared to unleash their titan powers. They really did it, Annie murmured, her voice laced with a bitter irony. They united the whole world, against us. People are afraid of what they don't understand, Naruto said, his eyes fixed on the approaching armada. And they hate what they're afraid of. It's an old story. So what's our story going to be? Mikasa asked, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade, her gaze locked on him. What are your orders? This was the moment that had haunted Eren for years. He had seen visions of the future, of a cataclysmic, rumbling, that would destroy the world. He had argued, pleaded, and fought with Naruto about it. To Eren, the only path to safety was to unleash the Wall Titans and trample their enemies into dust. Naruto had refused. Absolutely. We are not going to become the monsters they think we are, he had said. His voice ringing with the authority that had stopped wars in his own world. We will not answer genocide with genocide. We will break the cycle, Eren. Not continue it. Now, that philosophy was being put to the ultimate test. My orders are simple, Naruto said, his voice carrying over the wind to the waiting army. We will show them our strength. We will show them they cannot win. But we will do it with minimal loss of life. Our goal today is not to destroy them. It is to disarm them. We are here to end a war, not win one. He brought his hands together in the cross seal. 1,000 clones appeared on the coastline. Not just of himself, but duplicates of Mikasa and Annie as well, a tactic they had perfected, allowing their top commanders to be everywhere at once. The first Marleyan cannons fired. Massive shells screamed toward the shore. Before they could land, Armin transformed. The colossal titan rose from the sea in a blinding flash of light and steam, a god of destruction appearing amidst the fleet. The sheer shockwave of his transformation capsized a dozen ships. The battle began. It was a symphony of chaos and precision. The new parody army laid down a withering barrage of fire. Mikasa and her clone counterparts, using their advanced gear, became angels of death, zipping between the ships, disabling cannons and engines with perfectly placed thunder spears. Annie and her clones, in a stunning display of versatility, transformed partially, using the female titan's hardened limbs to punch holes in hulls and shatter rudders, a surgical and terrifying application of titan power. But the centerpiece of the battle was Naruto. He didn't fight, he commanded. He stood on the shore, a calm eye in the hurricane, his sage mode a perfect sensory web of the entire battlefield. And he unleashed a technique that left both friend and foe speechless. Sage art. 1,000-armed disarmament. From the surface of the ocean, 1,000 massive arms made of pure, golden chakra erupted. They were colossal, each one the size of a warship. They didn't punch or crush. They moved with a gentle, deliberate force. They plucked cannons from decks as if they were flowers. They lifted rudders from their housings. They wrapped around entire ships, lifting them from the water and placing them gently on the shore, their crews spilling onto the sand, shocked and unharmed. One by one, the mighty Allied fleet was being dismantled, its teeth pulled without a single lethal blow. It was a show of force so absolute, so overwhelmingly powerful, yet so merciful, that it broke the enemy's will to fight. Within an hour, the battle was over. The world's greatest army had been defeated without a single one of their ships being sunk. The soldiers and sailors, now stranded on the shores of the island they had come to destroy, could only stare in terrified awe at the golden-haired man who had defeated them with a wave of his hand. A truce was not requested, it was desperately pleaded for. Victory. A victory won on their own terms, staying true to their ideals. But as the cheers of the parody soldiers rose, Naruto felt it. The cold, the spiritual wound in his soul, the tiny piece of the void, flared. The massive expenditure of chakra, the sheer life force he had poured into the battlefield, had been the final, irresistible dinner bell for the entity that hunted him. The sky began to darken. The cheering died, replaced by a confused, fearful silence. The air grew still, the sea breeze vanishing. Sound itself began to dampen, as if the world were being wrapped in cotton. No, Naruto whispered, his face paling. Naruto, what is it? Mikasa asked, her triumphant smile fading into a look of pure dread. He didn't have to answer. They all saw it. Reality itself was beginning to fray at the edges. Not just the sky, but the very concept of it. The horizon began to blur, the colors of the world desaturating into a uniform, lifeless gray. The sea stopped moving, its waves frozen in place like a photograph. The laws of physics were being unwritten. The weaver of silence had arrived. It did not manifest as a creature. It manifested as an erasure. An encroaching, absolute nothing. Ness that was beginning to consume their reality. The captured soldiers began to scream as some of them simply faded into gray dust. The parody soldiers backed away in terror. Even Uren's attack titan, which he had just formed, looked up at the dissolving sky with what could only be described as primal fear. This was an enemy they couldn't punch. They couldn't cut it. They couldn't blow it up. It was entropy. It was the end. Naruto stood on the shore, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He looked at the spreading silence, the encroaching void. He had faced gods before. But Kagaya was a being of immense chakra. This was a being of immense nothing. How do you fight the end of existence? Then, the answer came to him. It was a terrifying, brilliant, and heartbreaking revelation, born from the very core of his power as the Sage of Six Paths. You don't fight entropy with force. You fight it with its opposite. Creation. He turned to Mikasa and Annie. Their faces were pale with terror, but their eyes were fixed on him. Their trust absolute even at the end of the world. I know what I have to do, he said, his voice impossibly calm. What can we do? Annie asked, her voice shaking. You can stand with me, he said, a sad, loving smile on his face. He reached out and took their hands. Mikasa's was warm and steady. Annie's was cold but gripped his with surprising strength. I love you both, he said, his voice thick with a universe of unsaid things. Never forget that. Naruto, what are you going to do? Mikasa's voice was a desperate whisper. When I came to this world, I tore a hole in the universe. He explained, his eyes glowing with a soft, golden light. That's how it found me. That's how it's getting in. I can't destroy it. I can't fight it. But I can seal it. He looked at the encroaching grayness. I'm going to give it something else to consume. I'm going to build it a new prison. He closed his eyes. He drew upon every last drop of his own chakra. He reached out and drew upon the life force of the world around him, the vibrant green of the island, the deep blue of the sea, the frantic, terrified hearts of every living thing. He gathered the hope from the parody soldiers, the fear from the Marlians, the love he felt for the two women holding his hands. He gathered it all, a swirling, incandescent sphere of pure life energy, the ultimate expression of the Sage of Six Paths power, the creation of all things technique. He was not going to create a moon to seal a ghetto statue. He was going to create a universe to seal a god of nothingness. Golden light erupted from him, pushing back the encroaching gray. He became a living sun, a pillar of pure creation. Mikasa and Annie cried out, shielding their eyes, but they did not let go of his hands. They poured their own strength, their own love, their own wills into him, anchoring him to this world. He focused all of it on the tear in reality, the source of the Weaver's entry. He didn't push the Weaver out. He pulled it in. He created a new, pocket dimension, a self-sustaining, infinitely complex universe in a bottle, and trapped the encroaching void inside it. He folded spacetime around it, sealed it with the power of yin and yang. And then did one final, terrible thing. He became the lock. He poured his own essence, his very soul, into the seal, making himself the eternal, living barrier between his new home and the silent, hungry void. The world snapped back into place. The sun shone brightly in a blue sky. The sea breeze returned. The waves began to move again. The sounds of a panicked world rushed back in. The Weaver of Silence was gone. The world was saved. But Naruto Uzumaki was gone, too. In his place, on the shore where he had stood, was a figure made of pure, golden light. It had his shape, his silhouette. But it was translucent, ethereal. It was silent, a living statue of condensed hope, its face locked in a serene, peaceful smile. Mikasa and Annie fell to their knees, air hands still outstretched to where he had been. They could feel him. His presence was still there, a warm, constant hum at the edge of their senses. But he was no longer with them. He was a part of the world now, a conceptual force. A guardian forever bound to that spot, the living gatekeeper between what is and what is not. The war with Marley ended that day. The surviving soldiers, having witnessed a literal battle between creation and oblivion, returned to their nations with a story no one would believe, and a terror that ensured Parody Island would be left alone for a very long time. Life went on. The world, scarred but saved, began to heal. Years passed. The manor house in Trost was quiet. Mikasa, the aging but still formidable supreme general, and Annie, the sharp, respected head of intelligence, had raised a family. They had children, with bright golden hair and impossibly blue eyes, or with dark hair and a fierce, quiet strength. They were a testament to a love that had defied worlds. The story ends on a warm, sunny afternoon. An elderly Mikasa and an elderly Annie, their hair streaked with gray, their hands wrinkled with age but still intertwined, stood on that same stretch of coastline with their children and grandchildren. Before them, the figure of golden light still stood, unchanged, unworn by the passage of time. It was a monument, a shrine, a permanent part of the landscape. One of their grandchildren, a little girl with blonde hair and fierce gray eyes, pointed at the figure. "Grandma, who is that?" Mikasa smiled, a sad, beautiful expression that held a lifetime of love and loss. "That," she said, her voice soft as the sea breeze, "is your father. That is the man who loved us enough to give us a world." Annie squeezed her hand, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. "He is the sun that fell from the sky," she whispered. "And he is the reason we have a dawn." They stood there for a long time, a family born of war and magic, watching. The man who was both gone and forever with them, a silent, smiling guardian, forever holding back the silence at the end of the universe, his ultimate sacrifice, the foundation of their new world. Chapter 7 End.